Scripture analysts like Sherlock the clues. Peep the exegesis, no chance to lose. Grit in the groove, theology with bite. Delve into the depths, find the light. Dialogue sharp, razor wit on display. Precision in the prose, no games to play. Nick the captain, guiding this ship through storms of confusion. Clear view in the pew. Rightly dividing the word, Nick be the guide. Breaking down the verses, wisdom worldwide. Tune in, log on, catch that live stream. Pure truth, no glam, divine dream.
What's going on? Yeah. Deshaun, your countdown was on point. All right, so God bless everybody. God bless everybody. Who do we have here? Read the Gospel, Stacy, Dry Bones, Sean, Embracing Truth, XJW, Laura, Shake, Trev, Everyday Catholic, Gina, Battle Tier. God bless everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We are going to be hitting that like, share, and subscribe buttons. Thank you all for reminding everybody about that. Richard, God bless you. Jesse, God bless you. One sec. Embracing the truth. So the debate that's going on, I'll pull it up right now. Wretched Sinner, God bless you. Let's see. So the debate that's going on is going to be on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel, Capturing Christianity, and it's between Jay Dyer, this guy right here on the left, Father Deacon Ananias, Trent Doherty, and I forgot this gentleman's name. His name is Christopher Tomaszewski. So the two guys on the left, they are Orthodox. Jay is an Orthodox, I guess, layman, technically. He's not clergy. He has, I believe, master's level education. Very sharp dude, debates all day, every day. Wildly popular YouTube channel. I'm sure most people are familiar with him. Father Deacon Ananias is regularly on Jay Dyer's live streams, and he offers, I guess, support would be the word I would use. You know, yeah, support. So generally, I think these two are in lockstep on most things. I don't know a lot about Father Deacon Ananias other than I believe he was a deacon who later became a priest in the Orthodox Church. I don't know if it's Rokor. I don't know if it's Moscow Patriarchate. I know it's not Go-Arch. And then on the Catholic side, we have Trent Doherty, who was on Capturing Christianity last week with William Albrecht to discuss the issue that they're debating tonight, namely whether or not Catholics and Muslims, or Christians and Muslims, worship the same God. And this gentleman to the right, I have no idea who he is. I think we looked him up the other night. I forgot what institution he teaches at, but he's an associate professor somewhere. Associate professor, adjunct professor, I forget what it was. I believe he also is a Catholic philosopher. So the two Catholics are going to be taking the position that Muslims and Christians do worship the same God. And if Trent's appearance on Capturing Christianity last week is any indication, he's going to be arguing from the standpoint of the philosophy of language and from linguistics, and he's going to be making a case that they have the same referent, right? And just by virtue of the fact that they're referring to the same God, they're worshiping the same God, even if one group, namely the Muslims, get everything about the worship of that one God wrong. They're still referring to the same God. So I thought his case was so strong on that, on the referent thing, that, my line of thinking came around. I started looking up some philosophy of language books that I had at my disposal, and I saw that what he was saying was not controversial at all. This is just the accepted view amongst philosophers of language. And, you know, when I started thinking about it, I'm like, okay, so you can be referring to the same God while still saying all the wrong things about him. And, you know, I went back over some material from many years ago, conversations that I had had on this subject with others. And some of the arguments I used are the common ones that people are using now. And I could see the flaws in them now. Like, for example, I said, you know, what if I was to worship my mother's dog and call my mother's dog the creator of the universe and so on and so forth? Does that mean I'm worshiping the same thing? Well, on this reading, no, because I already know when I refer to my mother's dog, I'm already referring to something other than the God of Abraham. So for the Muslim, it's not like they're saying, okay, this is Baal, and I'm just going to call him the God of Abraham. No, that's not what they're doing. They're taking the biblical witness, the God of Abraham that's mentioned in the scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament, mentioned by Moses, mentioned by Jesus, mentioned by St. Peter. They're taking that and they're saying that this is the true God and that the Jews and the Christians got some stuff wrong about him. You know, we're here to get everything right, so on and so forth. But the referent hasn't changed, even though they've bastardized what it is that this God is. You know, when you deny the Trinity, obviously something is amiss. But they're still referring to the same God. So I thought his case was pretty strong on that. And I can say with confidence that I think the referent is the same. Having said that, I still don't think Muslims are worshiping the same God, because I don't think what Muslims do counts as worship. All right. So that's where I'm at with it. But just to take it out of the abstract, right? Because we're talking about God and divine attributes and stuff like that. That's a little above all our pay grades, right? Let's just talk about Jesus of Nazareth, right? So when a skeptic who believes that there was a man named Jesus of Nazareth who lived in the first century, right? Who traveled throughout Galilee and the Decapolis and Jerusalem, and he preached this gospel of the kingdom and he called people to repentance, and he's reported to have worked miracles, even though they don't actually believe in miracles. When a skeptic or an unbeliever talks about that Jesus, are they talking about the Jesus that the Christians are talking about? I would say yes. But the skeptic doesn't believe that that Jesus is God. So are they still talking about the Jesus that the Christians are talking about? I'd still say yes. Well, they don't believe that Jesus really worked miracles, that people just thought he worked miracles. Are they still talking about the same Jesus? Yes. So if we could acknowledge that, or when the Quran talks about Abraham or Moses or any of the rest, if we could recognize that they have the same referent in mind with any of these, then what's so difficult to believe that they have the same referent in mind when they're talking about God? Right? To me, that doesn't seem like a big deal. It's the worship issue where I think it gets a lot hairier. I'm not what I'm not. I don't know what's going on with it. Oh, that's just my face. I have a skeptical face. Yeah, who said that above? Everyday Catholic Gina said I look skeptical. Yeah, that's my stock look. Let's talk God. I think there will be a Q&A. I think there will be. I think this is going to be like a timed debate. I don't think it's going to be a free-for-all. So, yeah, they're already a minute over their start time. Battle tier is going pretty good. I'm tired, but it's going pretty good. I highly doubt I'm going to get through this entire debate. I'm probably going to have to cut it off before the thing is over, but I want to get through as much as we can. So Goku, Vegeta versus Superman, Batman, basically gotcha. Let's get it. Okay, so I know Superman and Batman. I don't know the other two. But if you say so, I'll take you at your word. So you said you're Catholic. You don't agree that Muslims worship the same God as the Jews and Christians do. Perhaps some are earnest and pray to Muhammad. But wait, why are they praying to Muhammad instead of Allah? Do Muslims pray to Muhammad? I don't know any Muslims that pray to Muhammad. I don't know any. Read the Gospels, yeah. And I'm hopefully Dyer and Father Deacon Ananias can bring some objections to this philosophy of language argument that Doherty has made that, I just can't see. Because like I said, I think that is a good argument. I don't think it's particularly cause for concern or anything like that. But, these guys are more astute philosophically than I am. So hopefully they got something good. I hope they don't do the quantifier shift thing, because Doherty already addressed that in the last live stream. And I don't think that sticks for this particular thing. So hopefully they got something else. But we'll see. We'll see. Let me see. Thought of Family Guy when you said how skeptics think of Jesus of Nazareth. I haven't seen that one, but I'm sure it's hilarious. Let's see. Did you see the arrogant post JP made against you the other day in regards to intercession? Jimmy, yeah. I answered it on my last live stream. That's his opinion. He's entitled to it. If at any time
answering the question in debate form to Christians and Muslims worship the same God. I've got Dr. Trent Doherty, Dr. Christopher Tomaszewski.
He can feel free to do so. I have not seen in the last year, I've not seen his arguments get any better, but it is what it is. So we'll see what we see. All right, so it's starting. Let's get going.
Jay Dyer and Father Ananias with us tonight. And the format for tonight is mainly open dialogue, but we do have some opening statements at the very beginning of the show. So there's going to be 10 minutes for each side. I should mention,
I'm a little disappointed. I would have rather some timed stuff, but open dialogue will work, I guess, if they could behave.
10 minutes. Dr. Trent Doherty, Dr. Christopher, they are on the affirmative side. So they are Catholic. They are answering this question in the affirmative. So they've got each 5 minutes for an opening presentation. Then we're going to turn it over to Jay and Father Ananias. They've each got 5 minutes for their side, and then we're just going to go to open dialogue. And then toward the end of the show, if we have time, we'll do some Q&A with you guys. So with that said, we're going to jump right in. Last thing I'll mention before we get into the debate is we are going to, I've got bios for each individual debater presenter here. I've got that linked in the description of the video. And now,
all right, great. So in the fall of 1990, as a young evangelical, I went to Liberty University to be the research assistant for Dr. Norman L. Geisler. He has since passed away, God rest his soul, but he was one of my main first mentors. And while there at the Liberty Center for Research and Scholarship, I worked on a number of books with him. One of which was Thomas Aquinas, an Evangelical Appraisal, subtitled, Should Old Aquinas Be Forgot? Another one was called Answering Islam, that was co-authored with a student of his that was a former Muslim. And for the research for that book, we had to read the Quran cover to cover and take notes on 3x5 note cards. Yes, this is the fall of 1990. And so I had the opportunity at that time to read the Quran cover to cover, which I had not really anticipated. And I have read it, not cover to cover since then, but I've read it. I've returned to it occasionally, and I've even had studies on it with some good friends of mine, one of the groomsmen that was at my wedding. And what's clear from the Quran is it's obvious that Muhammad encountered Christian and Jewish preaching in Arabia. I think everybody's pretty much agreed that he probably didn't have an Old Testament or New Testament scriptures. I don't know, doesn't matter. But he clearly encountered their preaching and teaching. And the Quran explicitly states that Jewish and Christian scriptures are revealed by God, albeit incomplete, and that Muhammad came to complete that narrative. And it talks about Adam and Noah and Abraham and Joseph and many other biblical individuals. And in the course of doing this, the Quran mistakenly attributes many mistakes to Jews and Christians, and Jewish Christians in both in the details and in the interpretation of their own scriptures. So, for example, the Quran says that Noah had a son that refused.
All right, so already I like Doherty more this time around than last time. I didn't just care for his demeanor when he was on last week. And yeah, I didn't care, but he seems to have calmed down a little bit and he's not acting the same way he was acting last time. So that's good. I will say this, Jay just pulled out a big book with a bunch of Post-its in it, so they need to be aware of that. That means he's been doing some reading and note taking, so he's probably prepared. So
used to get on the ark, and it says that Aaron didn't make the golden calf. And the biggest and most central disagreement is that it says that Jesus didn't die on the cross. He just appeared to die on the cross. And in these places and others, what I want to note two things. First, Islam disagrees with the biblical narrative. Okay. Secondly, Islam is wrong. It's mistaken. The Quran gets it wrong. There are these disagreements, these contradictions between what Islam teaches and what Christianity teaches, what the Bible, what the Quran says and what the Bible says. And in that disagreement, it is my firm belief that the Quran and Islam are mistaken and that Christianity and the Bible have the correct view there. But notice two things, and we'll jump into the slides. And I've actually forgotten what these slides say. So when I see these slides, it will be reminding me of what they say. But notice two things about this story. By every extant semantic theory of reference is fixed by causation and context. All right, that's how reference gets fixed, by causation and context. And in the origin of the Quran, the origin of the foundation of Islam, there was clearly back and forth interaction between Muhammad and his early followers and whoever it was that wrote down the Quran, and Jews and Christians.
Battles here. I think right now he's arguing for reference, right? But I think he's going to say that that an entailment of reference is they are worshiping the same God, since they're referring to the same God. So we'll see where he goes with that. But what he's saying is true. Inwin should be able to verify this, because I sent him a bunch of books and I'm sure he looked up some on his own. He said he spent all night reading through these books. So, what he's saying is extant theories of reference. Nobody's saying anything different, right? So
that were preaching the gospel, preaching from the Old and New Testaments. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that leads to the first argument for the affirmative, that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. The semantic argument, premise one: if the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative, then its terms pick up their references from that biblical narrative. This is a straightforward consequence out of every reasonable semantic theory. Premise two: the Quran did originate out of this context of furthering the biblical narrative. That's just a historical fact.
we're watching it
QED.
live.
So the consequent of premise one
1 minute.
follows. 1 minute left. Okay, next slide. Disagreement argument. Premise one: we disagree only if we are talking about the same thing. If we're talking about two different things, we don't disagree. But we do disagree. Therefore, we must be talking about the same thing. Next slide. So this is actually the biggest slide. So what if we're talking about the same God? Absolutely nothing follows from that. Absolutely nothing follows from that, because the distinctive between Christianity and Islam isn't there are differences with respect to the doctrine of God, but it's Jesus Christ and his saving power and his acts, his virgin birth, sinless life, atoning death, powerful resurrection. That's what sets Christianity apart from Islam.
Right,
and so there's just no negative consequences that follow. Absolutely zero soteriological consequences follow from the affirmative to the question that Jews and Christians and Muslims worship the same God.
All right, there you go. So let's move now to Dr. Christopher.
You guys remember?
Can I ask a question real quick?
He reminds me of one of the Mythbusters. That's who he reminds me of.
Sure.
If you had more slides, I was wondering, would it be more beneficial if you had more time and then we also had a little more time?
I think
Okay.
that's the last one. I think that's the last slide.
Okay,
Are there
never
other slides? Yep, there we go.
mind.
Clark Kent.
This is actually a reply slide, a pre-reply.
Okay.
So no, that was it. The whole presentation, 5 minutes. Take it away, Tomaszewski, Dr. Tomaszewski.
Yeah, go ahead and
All
start
right,
sharing your screen. I'll pull it up whenever you're ready.
Do you want me to share it?
Yeah, share your screen.
Oh man.
Got it. You what I have here?
I feel like Father Deacon Ananias.
There we
does
go.
not
All right,
look
it's
like
up and ready.
the
So
picture
whenever
that
you
was on the
start, I'll start
thumbnail.
my timer. And yeah, feel free to begin.
Okay. Right. So I guess I agree with Trent, right, that this isn't actually a hard question. Christians and Muslims obviously worship the same God, and there's no good theory of linguistic reference or intentionality according to which they do not. As Trent alluded to as well, I want to try to qualify immediately here by noting what I'm not saying. I am not saying that there's any grace or salvation in the Islamic religion whatsoever. I'm not saying that any Muslims whatsoever are saved. Everything I'm saying here is consistent with the thesis that every Muslim who has ever lived is in hell. I'm not saying that there are any good reasons to be Muslim whatsoever. I'm not saying that anybody can be saved without explicit divine faith in both the doctrines of the Trinity and the Incarnation. I don't think they can, as a good Thomist. I'm not saying that Christianity and Islam are merely distinct revealed extrapolations of some near philosophical monotheism established by natural theology. I'm not even sure what that claim amounts to. I've seen it going around. I totally reject it. I am also not saying that all monotheists worship the true God, right? So this isn't just a claim about all monotheists. I think there's something special about Islam, as with Judaism, that makes it the case that they worship the same God as Christians. I don't think, for example, Mormons worship the same God as Christians. Okay. So
that's fascinating. Okay, so he's saying Muslims do worship the same God as Christians, but Mormons do not worship the same God as Christians. That's interesting. Because I would say, Marcos, God bless you. Good to see you. Aldis, God bless. Dark Sun, God bless. So, but Mormons are still picking up their theology from the Bible. Again, they're wrong. They're wrong about everything. And they've tacked on a whole bunch of weird stuff to it. But they're still picking out, they still refer to Yahweh and Elohim. So this is interesting. I'm curious to see where he takes that.
Just a little bit of a quick primer on common sense about reference and intentional action, right? We use words to refer to objects in the external world all the time, and we do so even under circumstances in which we know very, very, very little about the external object in question. For example, Jack the Ripper refers to a serial killer responsible for a series of murders in the Whitechapel area of London in 1888. It doesn't matter who you think Jack the Ripper is, how tall he was, whether he had facial hair, how he committed the murders. You could get all kinds of things wrong about him. Nevertheless, the term Jack the Ripper succeeds in referring to him, whoever he is. The largest pair of twin primes refers to the largest primes of the form P and P plus 2, if there is any such largest pair. Nobody even knows if there's such a largest pair, but if there is, it still succeeds in referring, the term the largest pair of twin primes succeeds in referring to that pair. And finally, Jesus of Nazareth, right, refers to a first century Jewish preacher born to the Virgin Mary in the Roman province of Judea. It doesn't matter if you think he's God or not. It doesn't matter how many of the narratives in the gospel you think are true of him, so on and so forth. It succeeds. So what follows? That it's fairly easy to refer to things, including to God, even if you get a lot of things wrong about the object of your reference, and even if you get a lot of things wrong specifically about God, including whether God subsists in three distinct hypostases, or whether Jesus of Nazareth is one of those hypostases. And so it's easy to refer to the true God. It's also fairly easy to worship the true God because worship is an intentional action like reference. And there's no good reason to think that worship having the correct intentional object for worship is any harder than having the correct intentional object for reference. Notably, though, and here's another thing I'm not saying it's fairly easy to worship the true God worthily or validly, to use Gavin Ortland's term. I think a sufficient condition on reference to and worship of the true God would be referring to and worshiping the unique, transcendent, immaterial personal entity who created all things, all that exists apart from himself, ex nihilo. Classical Muslims affirm this description of God so they succeed in referring to and therefore in worshiping him. It doesn't take more than that. It's just really easy, right? Moreover, we have a number of theological affirmations that this is the case from Paul in Acts 17:23 through 25, where he says, right,
Dyer's going to have a field day with him on
the Athenians
Gregory
the
Palamas
unknown
quote.
God that they worship. Okay, we have an affirmation from Gregory Palamas himself, telling his fellow Orthodox believers, right, to watch not to suffer anything like these ill-minded Muslims, not in regard to their reverence of God, obviously affirming here that they do indeed reverence God. And finally, from the living Patriarch of Moscow, I know we have here Muslims and Christians. Everyone is inquiring to the same God, a creator, and in answer to that, we are getting God's real help. So even contemporary Eastern Orthodox patriarchs believe in this. Okay, and I'll save my last slide for
God bless, Gina. Good to see you.
All right, so Jay, when you're ready, we'll go ahead and share your screen. And just keep in mind, you've got your microphone muted.
Unmute, dude.
There we go. Cool.
All right.
When you're ready, I'll start the 5-minute timer.
All right, I'm going to take a different course. I'm going to have to go fast because there's a lot of slides. I'm going to leave FDA for the semantic theory reference, and I'm going to take the course pointing out that Roman Catholic magisterium itself has already stated in the past what the correct view of Islam is that we would agree with. And today, Vatican II's documents contradict those previous statements. So I'm going to show that very quickly and very clearly. If we go to Pope Urban II calls for a crusade, the Council of Clermont in 1095. Here, the Muslims are referred to as the infidels that worship demons, and this is the beginning of this turbulent relationship from a crusade perspective. There is an earlier reference to extirpating them by Pope Sergius. 12th Ecumenical Council says that in terms of the, quote, Abrahamic faith, Lateran 4, 12, 15, Jews, for example, are not brothers in the Abrahamic faith because they are seen also as being heterodox, filthy, and like the Saracens, and are in fact supposed to wear different things in public, and that Christian princes, in fact, should suppress Judaism and Jewish power. Now, they keep this in mind because today we're talking about whether Jews, Christians, and Muslims all refer to the same, quote, God. It doesn't appear to be the case in the Middle Ages. They thought this way in this, and I understand that people are going to say, well, but Thomas teaches natural theology in the Middle Ages. Roman Catholic theology is guided by its magisterium. That's what Catholics are bound by. It's not an academic guided faith. It's actually a magisterial faith. The Fourth Lateran Council calls for a crusade, the Fifth Crusade, and to abandon this duty results in excommunication. So if you do not fight against the Muslims, you are then excommunicated. The Fifth Crusade, 1217, Pope Innocent III again does a papal bull, Quia Major. Muhammad is in fact Antichrist. The religion of Muhammad is Antichrist, and thus the deity referred to here is in fact not a correct worship. The word was worldly worship, but in fact, in the 15th Ecumenical Council, Pope Clement V said that the blasphemous public worship of Islam must be forbidden by Catholic states and Catholic kings, and if they don't, they are guilty and might be excommunicated. This offense should be completely removed. So notice the public worship is not congruent. There we go. Council of Vienne again calls the Muslims faithless enemies of Christ, unclean and blasphemers. Pope Calixtus III, 1455, says that it is his job to extirpate the diabolical sect of the reprobate faithless Muhammad. So again, what are we contrasting that with? Well, fast forward to Vatican II, after the Ecumenist revolution in the Roman Catholic Church, Nostra Aetate 3 says that Muslims adore the one God living and subsisting himself, merciful, all powerful, the creator of heaven and earth. No, he's not the creator of heaven and earth. Jesus is the creator of heaven and earth, according to biblical theology. If we go down to Lumen Gentium 16, we have the same statement that Muslims acknowledge the creator and profess the faith of Abraham and the one merciful God who will judge mankind on the last day. On the last day, now Jesus is who judges mankind on the last day, and Jesus is the creator. And also notes that in Hinduism, apparently with a capital G, proper God there, Hindus find a meditation that leads them to a flight to God with love and trust. I need the next, there we go. Biblically, how do we have this? Psalm 95, the gods of the nations are devils. So the references there do not attain to God. In 1 Corinthians 10:20, the gods of the heathens are devils. The sacrifices are offered to devils. St. Photini is the archetypal schismatic, and this is great because of Samaritan Unitarian.
Yeah, so where he's going to run into problems with that is the gods of the nations are already picked out as other than the God of Israel, right? So that's how Israel's God is the God of gods. So they're other than Yahweh. What Doherty and Tomaszewski, I think that's his last name, forgive me, they're going to argue that Allah does not pick out any other God other than the God of Israel, right? So all of these points, true as they are, I don't think they're going to go very far in refuting that argument, but we'll see where Father Deacon Ananias takes it.
Religion is a great example of what we're talking about here. What about our Unitarian faith? Do we have any examples of this in the Bible where divine revelation reveals with this? You worship what you do not know. So I can grant that there's an abstract conceptual knowledge, but Vatican II talks about knowing, adoring, and worshiping. And so the generic abstract sense of a conceptual idea of who God is not what is relevant to this debate, and precisely is what is the problem for Vatican II. So Jesus says again to the Pharisees, you worship what you don't know. The Pharisees say, well, we have access to the Father. We refer to the Father and God himself. He is our Father. Jesus says, you do not know him. So the true sense of know is to know in this sense, and they do not attain to that. Like Jesus says, in the Old Testament, it is the I am that is Jesus. Jesus says, I am the one in the bush. It is not a Unitarian God. In fact, Abraham believes in the Trinity. Islam is premised on Arian and Nestorian beliefs. And so just as the Catholic Church condemns classically Arianism and Nestorianism as failing to obtain any kind of significant worship that gets you anywhere, and this is the key problem, this is not an intellectual issue. This is actually an issue of spirituality. How much?
That's fine.
Oh. So here you can see specifically the rejections. And 1 John 2:23 says that if you do not have the Son, you do not have the Father.
All right, now let's move to Father Ananias. And he does not have slides, so I'll just put everyone full screen up here.
Thank you. When you're ready, Trent. And Christopher and everybody. Okay, following the dogmatic proclamations of Vatican II and the last two popes' declarations on the matter, Roman Catholics have affirmed that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, despite Islam having serious errors concerning who and what God is. Much of this is due to Roman Catholicism dogmatizing what is known as natural theology. It's important that I define what's meant by the Roman Catholic version of natural theology, which is different from what Orthodoxy calls natural revelation. For the West, the project of natural theology, which is distinct from natural revelation, developed and arguably came to its climax with Thomas Aquinas. Natural theology is typically defined as being what the human mind, by the light of natural reason alone, can know about God apart from revelation. For Aquinas, as with most natural theologians, there's the implicit belief that certain truths about God can be known and demonstrated by reason alone, without depending on divine revelation. Natural theology, therefore, makes an essential distinction between the nature of faith and reason, a distinction that depends on certain epistemological assumptions concerning the nature of knowledge in general. Therefore, in arguing that we Christians do not worship the same God as Muslims, I focus specifically on epistemological assumptions and critique their version of natural theology from epistemological grounds. I will argue that their version of natural theology erroneously assumes what Richard Swinburne calls the rational core doctrine. I will argue in the form of a modus tollens the following: that one, if there is a rational core doctrine, then the natural theology arguments for the existence of God can work. Two, there is no rational core doctrine. Therefore, the natural theology arguments for the existence of God do not work. Hence, Dr. Doherty and Dr. Tomaszewski cannot prove that the monotheistic religions worship the same God. Now, Dr. Doherty will argue that the same referent can be fixed despite two groups having radically different concepts, or what Frege would call guises or senses. One can even ascribe attributes or predicates to the subject that are incorrect and still refer to the same entity. Therefore, the same reasoning can be applied to God. This, however, strawmans our position. It assumes we believe ascribing different attributes to an entity necessarily means we are talking about a different entity. That is, there is no common referent. This isn't our position. We admit that people can attribute different predicates to a subject and radically disagree about those predicates without the subject phrase referring to.
Oh, I think I caught up. Hold on.
Different things. Our argument does not hinge on the fact that because Muslims have different predicates attributed to God, that therefore they must be referring to a different entity. Our opponent's error, among other things, is their failure to recognize the special semantic and logical behavior of terms like God, which are different from natural objects when it comes to fixing reference. Consequently, Dr. Doherty's examples will not work to establish his thesis when it comes to God. Different religions cannot share a common nature due to the special behavior of the term God. The argument I developed following Gerby is to identify this error with what is known as the fallacy that results from the non-substitutivity of identicals in belief context. There are several ways I show this. Because the term God is not a rigid designator, nor is it a proper name, it operates much more like what's called mental objects in philosophy, as opposed to natural objects, and possesses a special logical and semantic character that makes it the substitutivity of the term God in belief context something that natural theologians assume. Well, it makes that impossible and fallacious. I demonstrate this by showing how the rational core doctrine, which assumes a common referent when substituting the term God in various deductive arguments, leads to contradictions. I also show that the rational core doctrine commits a quantifier shift fallacy. Next, I argue that because the term God operates more like what we call mental objects and cannot be established independently from a religion, independently of the context of rules and instructions which it's used. It's similar to a long conjunct. Dropping any of the principles or attributes established by that religion will result in a different truth condition and change the referent. Lastly, I'll critique natural theology's assumption that they can justify that the human mind can know things by the natural light of reason alone apart from revelation. Although there may be conditions that serve to be justifications that give rise to real instances of knowledge, the natural theologians claim that knowledge exists entails meta-theoretical validation that requires justifying fundamental premises of epistemic theory at the second order. These fundamental premises either cannot be justified because they're merely assumed without any supplementary warrant, or they're justified because of other premises, so on ad infinitum, either being the theory itself, which is epistemic circularity, or gives rise to an endless chain of reasons. The justification being, okay. I almost got
it's so close.
He could have finished that sentence. I wish he would have dumbed it down a little bit more for the audience, right? Like, I think we all get what he's saying, but he could have, he could have put it in more layman's terms than that, but we'll see where they go from there. So real quick though, just to touch on what I'm not said, if you don't have the Father, philosophy won't help you convince others they do just because they appeal to Abraham. The Pharisees appealed to Abraham. Jesus called them sons of Satan. Oops. So this is something I think I mentioned to Inwin earlier today. I think there's all types of things going on here. Like, what does it mean to have the same God or to worship the same God? I think these are important things that we have to ask. And so if by having God, you're saying that you're in covenant relationship with God, that you're part of the family of God, that you're properly serving God, and that you're licitly worshiping God, I think you can say that the Muslims have none of that. And yet they're still referring to the same God. It's not like they think that they're referring to some other entity, right? Again, like Doherty said in his opening, if there's a real disagreement between us and Muslims, then we have to be talking about the same God. Because if we're talking about two different gods, then there's no disagreement. There's nothing to disagree over. So, if you're talking, I think in his last thing, he made the analogy from he's got a guy that works for him whose name is Jesus, who's an alcoholic, and his wife calls looking for him all the time. And if somebody saw his phone ringing and it said Jesus's wife, they're going to say Jesus didn't have a wife. And he's like, yeah, I don't disagree with you. We agree. That Jesus of Nazareth, didn't have a wife, doesn't have a wife, but Jesus, my gardener, does have a wife. So there's no disagreement. We don't disagree over that because we're talking about two different things. And yet Muslims and Christians do disagree over God because they're talking about the same God. They're just saying different things about that one God. So let's see where they go from here.
Well, this was
you get the point.
This was a lot of information, you guys, and I understand that, and I think everyone here understands that was just a lot for
Jaeger. Let's see. We're gonna put you in timeout for a little bit.
From every single individual person.
Yeah,
so what we're going to do now is we're turning it over to open dialogue between all four presenters. My job is to moderate, and I won't be getting too involved if I don't have to. Hopefully it can just be open dialogue and you guys have a great time. If it does get a little bit heated, I will jump in and we might have to move to timed responses. That's just worst case scenario. If we have to do that, we will. But otherwise, I'm just going to leave it up to you guys to take the conversation where you think is best. So whoever would like to begin, go ahead and jump in.
I'd like to start with the question to Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing though. And when it's not a general God, it's a specific God, namely the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you can say you believe in that God, but you don't do anything that God requires of you. Therefore, you're not a son of that God. You're a son of the devil. And yet, your belief in that God, your claim to be worshiping that God, it's still a claim to be worshiping the same God, right? So I hear you, but again, just for the reference bit of it, just for the we are referring to the same thing. Yeah, I don't think that's really a problem with what you're saying.
Jay, thanks for all the quotes. It's obviously a lot of information to digest in a short amount of time, but I do appreciate, referring to a magisterial body of work. That's something that Catholics and Orthodox have in common, that Protestants typically are not gonna like. So I want to start with that point of appreciation. However, it seemed like I think every single one of the passages, as far as I could tell, was totally consistent with an affirmative answer. So, for example, that Christians and Muslims worship the same God is consistent with them worshiping demons also. It's consistent with considering Islam so dangerous as to prevent the public worship. I would assume that, we know that the Catholic Church ordered the burning of Christian heretics, that they not only allowed that they were referring to the same being, but I think required that they were referring to the same being. So I don't think there's any limitation whatsoever on the sort of suppression or maligning, as it were, of any view just because they share the same view of God.
Well, how could the referent be a demon and at the same time be the true God?
It's
No, I
not.
said they
The
could be
claim is
both.
just that there are multiple. Yeah, the claim is just that there are multiple referents, right? They worship more than one entity.
Who? Muslims?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
imagine that
Anybody, but
the claim there is historically early Muslims, at the transition into Islam from Arabian polytheism.
Yeah.
There was presumably a
Mhm.
transition period where they're both worshiping the true God and their pagan deities who might well be demons.
This isn't the transition period. This is
Just
well
like
into the
just
Middle
like the
Ages.
Jews, just like the
No,
Jews
no,
did.
But I don't
But
grant that
that's
Jews.
referring to
I
the
don't-
religion.
I don't
the
grant that
quotation
Jews.
is
Sorry,
from the
Christopher,
Middle
go ahead.
Ages. Sorry, the
This is
quotation
well
is from
into
the
the
Middle
history of
Ages.
Islam. It is not early Islam. The 1200s is not early
Citation
Islam.
needed. Citation needed.
The citation was given in my opening statement. The medieval councils that I referred to. Do you want me to bring them back up?
You're more than welcome to. I can see that the quotations are from the Middle Ages. I'm questioning what period those quotations are referring to in Islamic history.
Are you familiar with Islamic history?
Not
No.
very much. That's why I'm asking the question.
Okay. Now I know Trent is. So let's.
I
bring
am
him up.
very.
Eaton.
Right.
Well,
By the way, does
Now,
it seem a bit bizarre to say that though? If obviously we have a quote here that's saying that they worship demons, to simply go, well, they might have actually changed, and that's not a great argument, wouldn't you think?
Well,
you'd
wrong.
have to have
No,
more
that-
substance.
He's factually
It's not
wrong
an
that
argument.
it's not early Islam, first of all, so that's factually wrong. Secondly, it's the Pope himself saying that they worship the demonic, which is equivalent to the argument. It's equivalent to the argument that Paul is making when he says that the things that the pagans and the infidels worship, they sacrifice to demons. And Paul says that that's what infidels do. The Pope consistently throughout the Middle Ages, many popes call them infidels.
Okay.
Yeah, because they don't believe in
this is-
Jesus. They don't believe in
Yeah,
Christianity. They are infidels.
Yeah, and what does 1 John 2:22 and 23 say if you don't believe Jesus?
you don't have the Father.
Father's the devil.
What does it specifically say in the text? You don't know?
Anybody who denies the Son doesn't
go
have
to
the
that. You
Father.
wanna go to
vice
that?
versa.
In
Well, I would
Greek
like to-
or what?
Hold on. First of all, I would like you to
in the
show
Greek,
us
so-
where in that.
If you can put up
Go
I'd
ahead.
like to see where in the original quotation that you just had up it says anything about which period of Islamic history the Pope in question is
That's
referring
an
to.
irrelevant point. It doesn't.
He's
even
referring
matter.
to calling a crusade about present day circumstances. Urban II, you didn't know
But
this?
But
He's calling
that
the
doesn't mean
present
that
one-
he's not faulting it for its origins. That just doesn't follow. It
He
just
is
doesn't
saying
follow.
they are demon worshippers. So you're trying to change
Yeah.
it to make it what it's not saying. Look, what does 1 John 2 say there?
No.
No. What does 1 John 2
So
say? What is 1 John 2?
the claim I literally can't see it. The
I'll
claim
read it to you.
here
Let me read
is
it to
that
you.
Muslims do worship demons. Well, there's nothing about. If we just stick to the logic of it, I mean, I think the history is
No,
interesting.
it's not
but
logical because if they
So-
worship demons, then the referent isn't the Father.
No, you're
A
missing
referent
the
of
point,
what?
Jay. The point is that any person, Muslim or otherwise, could, just like the Jews did at times, worship both the true God and demons. So there is just a logical non sequitur from they
No, but
worship demons to
What did
they
I
don't
argue?
worship the
I
same
argued
God.
that
That's
I
the
argued
simple point. Nope, that's it. Nope, that's it. That's the
This guy can't be serious. All right, I'm back to not liking him. I don't like the fact that he's eating and he's acting like he's not taking this serious. If you don't want to take it serious, you didn't have to come up here. Second thing, this guy, this dude, aside from that wallpaper, he's got some noise going on in the background. It sounds like a lawnmower or a blender or something. He needs to get that situated. But so them asking if that quotation is referring to the origins of Islam, that's irrelevant. It really has nothing to do with it. Even for the point that they're making, it's inconsequential. Now, if the quotation says they worship demons, I might ask, okay, so if they worship demons, are you claiming that they worship more than one Allah? Right? And if you are, like, well, then where are you getting that from? Meaning, so that's what they're saying. They can worship demons alongside the true God, as Israel has done throughout her history, right? So they did worship Yahweh, but they also worshiped at times the Ashtaroth and Baal and Dagon and whoever else. So that's the point he's making, but he's being kind of a jerk about it. Nope, that's it. Done. That's it.
Don't
simple
tell me
point.
no.
It's a non
That wasn't
sequitur.
what I argued. My argument was is that Vatican
God
II
bless.
causes the ambiguity by saying that Muslims worship, adore the one true God and know him. That ambiguity leaves it open as if that worship is accepted and that it is a genuine pipeline to God. And it is not, because as 1 John 2 says, if you deny the Son, you do not have the Father. And so Islam is predicated on
Do not have the Father. Have
Oh,
and,
wait, I
and
have a
refer to are
question.
totally different relations.
Correct.
There's just
What do you-
this is
Total
just
bullshit.
not.
You're just
You
making
need
up
to
stuff.
cut the.
I agree.
It means you don't
threads
have.
So I agree with him on that. I do think it's different. Refer to versus have. They can refer to the same God without actually having him, without being in a relationship with him, without worshiping him properly, without believing 98% of the things that are true about him. They could still be thinking of the same being. So I agree with him on that point.
Or
the
finally.
Father. You lose the Father. All heretics lose the Father. You're saying no. This is basic Christianity.
Have
You
and
think
refer to.
How did Basil write
Have
about
and
the
refer to.
How did Basil write
What do
about
you
the
think-
union? Did Basil think
What do you mean by
What's
had the
what's
mean-
Father Ananias trying to say? What's that, Father
Also-
Ananias?
So, in light of what you're saying, too, I'm sorry to be a nerd and bring it back to causal theory as a reference, but I'm sure you'll appreciate this. So, let's suppose I grant you that maybe there are multiple demons that they're worshiping, but doesn't that? Let's suppose one of the things that you said is that context and causation. So, a causal theory of reference as far as fixing the referent. If they're worshiping demons and the revelation to Muhammad comes from a demon, which by the very admitting that they're worshiping demons, at the very least, is possible, wouldn't that actually fix the referent to not actually be the one true God? Isn't that possible according to causal theory of reference?
the referent of what?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's good that you
if
don't
the
think
devil
it's really dark.
it came and revealed to Muhammad the revelation that he received, and he thinks or calls it whatever, because again, this is not a rigid designator. This word can mean multiple things in multiple.
Yeah, I'm not what I'm not. But that's the thing. It's not the description. So you got the descriptive cluster theory, and then you have the causal theory. So the causal says that the referent is fixed by, some historical whatever. Whenever he's first identified as whoever he is, right? Along the lines, you can affix different descriptions to this being, whoever he is. And some could be correct, some could be incorrect, but you're still referring to the same one. So causal theory just takes it back to the history and the origin of the referent. And that's fixed over time. Cluster or descriptive says we know the referent by the description. So now the question with that becomes, how different must a description be before you realize you're talking about something else completely? And that, I don't know that there's any set thing, because, what if I get 2 things wrong? What if I get 200? What if I only get half a thing wrong? You know what I'm saying? So on causal theory, it wouldn't matter if the descriptions change, because Doherty and Headphones, I forget his name, Tomaszewski, they're arguing that, yes, the Muslims get God wrong, but they're still referring to the same God, even though everything they attribute to that God is wrong, right? I don't think they think everything they attribute to that God is wrong, but they're still referring to the same God. Let's see this. You're saying Jay has been posting things about Orthodox clergy. He posted humility is just ecumenism pretending to be nice. Is that what he said?
Possible worlds. You're saying that causal.
Yes, for real life. But, forget about that. Forget about the souls of Muslims for a second. Forget about the fact that we want people to come to know the truth. Forget about all of that. Just if the argument is, and they're arguing worship, so it's something different. And the Catholics have to defend Catholic statements, which is why Jay's a genius to bring up papal bulls and things like that prior popes have said, perform an internal critique, go in, show that there's inconsistency in these Catholic documents. That's a good tactic. But forget all of that. Like, I get where you're coming from. You're saying the following actually matters. Just for the sake of argument. Nothing is on the line in this theoretical world we're in. We just want to make an argument about reference and how things refer. Right? Just take that and don't worry about who's actually following, who's actually doing a right thing, who actually has the real God versus doesn't have the real God, who's worshiping who. On the reference thing, I think these 2 top guys are right, but I want to see where Deacon Ananias is going to go, Father Deacon Ananias, because he said he's going to be arguing some stuff based on the philosophy of language, and he's bringing some epistemology into it. So we'll see what he's saying.
Is not enough to fix the referent to something else.
Well,
I
no,
wouldn't.
that's it.
You
I
need
mean,
s-
the
sorry,
point, the
sorry,
point is
Trent,
that even when Satan refers to God, Satan talks about God, he's referring to actual God. And so even if a demon is behind the writing of the Quran, it doesn't change the fact that the word Allah refers to God. There's just
Does Vatican II say
there's just
worship
no
and
connection
adore?
there. There's no
Does
connection there.
Vatican II say worship and adore?
What's the question?
Does Vatican II use the terms worship and adore?
Probably less.
Battle tier. Well, it's like this. So if Moses says that the angel of the Lord / the Lord himself who appeared in the burning bush and spoke to him from the burning bush, right? And now Jesus comes along and Jesus affirms that. Have you not read? And he brings up that exact story to talk about how God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because that's what God says to Moses out of the bush. And he's brings that up to make the point that God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And then you have the Apostle Peter in Acts preaching the same thing, saying that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now Muhammad comes along telling the story of the burning bush, saying that he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. Right? He doesn't say Jacob, he says Ishmael. He's still referring to the same thing, right? He's not thinking that there's some other being. He's not thinking that it's Dagon or Baal or Chemosh or whoever. He's not thinking that that's who's in the burning bush, and we're just going to call that God, Allah. No, he's thinking of the same God that Moses talked about, that Jesus talked about, that Peter talked about. Now, if what he says after that is wrong, that's fine, but he's still referring to that God that spoke from the burning bush, right? And from Muhammad's point of view, the Christians got him wrong. So he's here to correct the Christians and the Jews and all that who messed it up.
Lots of times.
Why are you eating on? That's completely disrespectful to eat.
Wait,
on
I
a
don't
debate.
get. I don't get this. I need you to explain this to me. So if the devil appears to you and says, "Well, I'm actually God," and you're saying,
No.
given that causal theory of reference, we're still
No.
doesn't matter.
I'm saying
you're still doing.
I'm saying no. I'm saying if the devil appears to you and says, "Like God is lying to you, you shall not surely die if you eat of this fruit of this tree," that even though he's Satan and he's misleading you and leading you into damnation, when he says God, the word, it still refers to the one true God.
Yeah,
I actually think
reference
the
is not
example
the
works
debate. It's worship and
totally
adore.
against your view.
Worship
It
and
actually helps
adore,
our
dude.
view.
Stop distracting.
So that's where it is, though. He's saying reference is not the debate. That's the question I'm interested in. Worship and adore. I'm with Jay and Father Deacon on that one. I want to see if they'll be able to sway them over to that. But I also want to see if Jay and Father Deacon can at least concede the reference point. So
Acting and playing games. Worship and adore.
What-
The debate.
So if I can,
What are you laughing at?
if I can,
Worship and adore. Is that equivalent to no?
That's not even a sentence. What's your sentence? Make a claim. What
Once you
is the
stop
claim?
smacking
Those
apples,
are
why don't you
phrases.
stop smacking your food in a debate?
I'm waiting for a debate. The debate requires an argument. What's
Worship
your
and adore
argument?
is the
I
text
put up
of
a
it.
syllogism.
You're literally
Okay.
not
I
going
put
to
up
address what
Moses'
Vatican
comments.
II says.
Where's
You're
your
a joke, dude.
argument? You're just saying words.
Let me-
Vatican II
Just
uses the
words.
term
Words,
worship and
words,
adore.
words.
Look at this. This guy's having a meltdown.
what is the?
What's the
Worship and
sentence?
Jay, here,
is the text of Vatican II. So
Hold on,
you're
hold on,
arguing
hold
about knowing
Let's get-
God
let's
that
get
you can
Christopher-
acknowledge the demons. Stop interrupting
Let's
me,
get
man.
Christopher. Let's get Christopher in here. He hasn't
okay,
had a chance to speak in a while.
interrupting.
so I think this is going to be very
Oh,
helpful, right? So this is a question for Jay. I think he's right to point to, okay, right. So the resolution is, do Christians and Muslims worship the same God?
Yeah, the very
Uh,
thing that this idiot on the
it's
top is ignoring and acting like it's not an
It-
argument. The question is worship and adore. That's the terminology of Vatican II.
Okay. So what?
1
do you
John
see,
2 says
Jay?
you lose the Son and the
Let me
Father.
finish.
when you
Let him
deny the
talk.
Son.
Finish. You gotta let me get the question out. Okay.
He asked me for an argument,
So,
Tom. I'm happy to
what
let
is-
you finish.
What is the gap between reference and worship or adoration? In other words, if I can succeed in referring to the one true God, what would then prevent me from worshiping or adoring that one true God?
Denying the fundamentals of who that deity is. So just like when we say that in a relationship, I know my wife, that's different than a conceptual knowledge about my wife, right? We all know this, that the Bible speaks this way. I could say that when I debate Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, right? Jake knows quite a bit about Orthodox Catholic Trinitarianism, either side. And so we could say Jake knows about the Trinity. And in that sense, he knows the Trinity. But he does not know the Trinity in the sense of worship and adoration. And that's the problem text of Vatican II that started all this debate. That's why I keep referring to Vatican II.
Right. So, what is it that is so fundamentally wrong about the Islamic conception of
Islam is
God?
predicated on is predicated on the rejection of the deity of the Son, God as a father. You know that Islam teaches that God is not father, right? Allah is not father. It also teaches that Allah is the creator of evil. We could bring in other things that I think actually disqualify.
Stacy, so it says professing the faith of Abraham, they along with us adore the one true God. So it does say that they adore him. Now, if they want to make a distinction between adoration and worship, I'll leave that to them to make. It uses the language of adoration and Lumen Gentium. I'll go back and look at Nostra Aetate. But if adoration and worship is the same thing, then it's saying that the Muslims do worship the one true God, right? But it says they profess to hold the faith of Abraham.
Disqualify it from Swinburne's core attributes. Allah updates his knowledge. He's not omniscient.
Hey,
Okay,
Cameron, can you bring up my
These are
Superman
positions
slide?
that exclude it from the common core argument, as Father Deacon mentioned at the beginning.
So, okay, one last follow up on that. So then why would any of that, given what I pointed out about the reference of the ease of reference and intentional action, why would even those severe errors about the nature of God make us think that Muslims fail to worship the God that they're attempting to worship, that they fail to adore the one true God?
I know this one.
I mean,
Jesus answers in John 4 to that, and he says to the woman at the well, I'm answering. The Samaritans are Unitarians. It's the same fundamental ontological position as Islam, right? They're Unitarian. Jesus says, you worship what you don't know. So the true sense here of what matters in terms of worship and adoration.
So she does worship it.
But the point is that she doesn't know it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. The
fully,
resolution is
not intimately.
And that was the whole argument that I made. That's what I said. I said, Jake knows the Trinity.
The resolution
Cameron, can you put up my Superman slide?
Muslims, the resolution of the debate. Hold on. The resolution of the debate was whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God. If you concede that it's possible to worship the true God even without, in some sense, knowing him, then you've just conceded.
But I'm not conceding that because the point of the passage is that the knowledge is not getting you anywhere. Islam is predicated on rejecting the Son. And as
what do you
John
mean by getting anywhere? Getting anywhere in terms of salvation? Because I agree with that. Who cares if they're getting anywhere in terms of salvation?
Worship and adoration in Vatican II suggests that there's a pipeline that does attain to the object, that it's acceptable, and that's why the popes go and pray in the mosques. That's
not why any pope has ever paid in a mosque. That's not
why any
so silly.
No, it's not silly.
So
this is what. Can I share my screen right here to show you what I'm talking about?
Nope, not yet. Nope, not yet. It's my turn. Nope. So I did the courtesy. Of giving everybody syllogisms that summarize my argument in simple logical form. It's a courtesy, and it makes it an easy target. It allows you to say, I disagree with premise 1 or I disagree with premise 2. We did not get that from you. We got a hodgepodge of quotes and no logic connecting them together. Your argument appears to be, and if you've got a slide otherwise, correct me, the argument appears to be if two people attribute different essential properties to a subject term, they cannot refer to the same entity.
No,
the Superman argument blows that apart. The Superman argument blows it apart.
It's a specific rejection of the referent. Is Islam predicated?
It's irrelevant.
No, it's not. Exactly. If it's predicated on rejecting that thing, then it's no longer referring to.
What was the original thumbnail that Cameron had? Hold on, let me find this. I think it said like spicy. Yeah, spice alert. Look at this. Spice alert. So yeah, he wasn't lying. This is Doherty is definitely getting spicy. Like he's crazy. And I don't care for it. Let me go out on the record and say that I do not care for his attitude. I didn't care for the eating. I don't care for the nope and I mean, come on, man.
The worship and adoration of that thing. Jesus is being rhetorical.
You need it. What? Put it in a syllogism, Jay. Put it in a syllogism. You've got no logical connection between this. Yeah, you don't have to. If you did, you'd have an actual target.
Because the argument is about whether or not the
I
worship is
dare you.
acceptable.
I dare you.
Dude, I don't
Put
care
it in a
what you're
syllogism
daring,
so we
but
can evaluate
I
it
don't-
for
all
logical.
I have to do
You're
is
just
show-
hiding behind it.
I
You're
came here-
hiding behind
listen,
a pile of quotes.
Listen, screamer, I came here to demonstrate the magisterial contradictions, and I've already done that. You said that God can be worshipped as a demon and as the true God at the same time. You already made a fool.
No, nobody ever said that. Nobody
Yes, you
ever
did.
flag
said
the
You
that.
said
tape
that the
on
reference
that.
could be.
Flag
You
the
said
tape
both.
on that. I'll
You
give you
said both.
$1,000. I'll give you $1,000 if you can find that on the tape.
Oh,
$1,000.
shut up.
You said
Didn't
it was
happen.
both. You said it was both. You said
I said
that
an individual. I said an individual, like the Jews at times, could worship both the true God and a demon. And therefore, it is not the case that X
So it's
worships
not
a demon
it's not-
entails
that
X
that
doesn't worship
worship doesn't
God.
get you
It's
anywhere.
pure logic.
That worship
It's
doesn't
pure
get you
logic.
anywhere.
Learn it.
I'm
Take
not
a class.
arguing the logic. I'm arguing your dogmatic
I know you're not
contradiction.
arguing because it takes
Your
logic
dogmas
to argue.
contradict.
That's why you're not
Your
arguing.
Let me just point this out in fairness. I don't want to always just, I don't want to pick on a Catholic dude, not Jay. What do we have going on here? What is this little horn? It looks like Jay's hair worshipped half a demon before he came on this debate. You see this thing? Oh man. All right. This is devolving quickly.
Must contradict. Do your
Jay, can I
dogmas
just
contradict?
ask? Jay, can I just ask what you mean by it doesn't get you anywhere? What do you mean by that?
I argue that Vatican II's teachings contradict previous teachings. That's my argument.
No, just what do you mean by it doesn't get you anywhere?
No,
I just
That is
know what
my
that means.
argument. It doesn't. There's no salvific acceptance of God in that relationship.
They agree with that.
Well, that's
Who
what we
cares?
think. That's what we think.
completely beside the
Yeah,
point.
that was
of the-
in his
It's not
opening
beside the
statement.
point. My argument is that Vatican II contradicts the previous
Yeah,
dogmas.
I
That's my
definitely cut him.
argument. That's what I came to argue.
What
If
does
you
that
want to
argument
put-
have to do with the resolution of the debate and the title of the debate? I don't what are
Worship
we
and
doing?
adoration that is accepted by God is what I'm arguing about. So you can argue something else, but who cares about
Well,
that?
then,
My point is that
then you're on
my
the,
point. Listen,
then you're
you
on
want
the
me to
whole
make the
channel.
point with? Can I put my slide back up to make why I'm making this point? My slide. The reason that this matters is that this is not an intellectual issue, believe it or not. This is a spiritual
Oh,
issue.
really?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
I know that as a Thomist, you think that the problem is intellectual, but it's not. It's spiritual. So when the
Problem here
popes
looks like intellectual.
act on this Vatican II document that Muslims, Jews, and Christians all worship the same God, and they pray in the synagogues and the mosques towards Mecca, which according to Aquinas are actions of apostasy, that's my argument. You have an apostate papacy that you follow and that you defend. This is your spiritual tradition. From
argument
your
ha-
infallible.
An
Yeah,
argument
you
has
have to
premises and a
interrupt
conclusion
me.
and
You
inference
have to
rules.
interrupt me.
You got no
What?
arguments.
This is the
got
argument.
no arguments,
the argument
man.
is your dogma
An
contradicts.
argument has premises and conclusions.
The dogma contradicts. Does your
But
dogma
Can I just ask
syllogism.
another?
does your dogma
Can I
not
just ask
contradict?
another?
So
Can
they
I just
can't
ask
answer-
another clarifying
They
question?
can't answer the obvious contradiction between
I mean-
going into crusades and then now praying in the mosque towards Mecca. This is your problem.
No,
Can I
because
just ask-
My problem.
no, because it's a false religion. It's a false religion.
Yeah,
Of
your
course-
religion is the false religion. Correct. The papacy is a false religion on the screen for you right there.
Papacy
You're
isn't a religion,
laughing.
bro.
You're the clown, dude. Your popes are praying in
Yeah,
mosques. and
no, I'm
synagogues.
laughing. All right. I'll pay you $100 if you can give me a syllogism on the
Oh,
spot,
You
right
got
now.
fired
really?
for- you got fired for a sex scandal. You don't have $100 to pay out.
Oh, we brought
I
him
love
up.
how Christopher and I raise our hands. Where are they at? Here's the hand.
Let's hear from those guys for a while.
And yeah, for those not familiar, he did get fired for a sex scandal. So let's just look at this real quick. Not that it makes a difference for any of his arguments or anything, but you know, just for those who would like to know who it is you're watching. So it says he used to work for Baylor. It says Doherty responsible for violating sexual harassment and interpersonal violence policy. And there's several updates to this. Yeah, so apparently he got fired. He was taken before a board. They found him guilty, whatever. They fired him. And then he claimed that they fired him because he was launching a lawsuit against them or something. So it said Doherty wrote a public Facebook post in which he claims to have received a large financial settlement from Baylor, resulting from a lawsuit he filed against the school. He also appears. Let me get this out of here. How do I get rid of this? I don't know. Let's make it small. There we go. So he also appears to, where are we at? To reveal that at least some of the allegations against him involve sexual harassment, which he says were used as weapons against him because of his political views. He also suggests that the settlement is hush money paid to him by Baylor because of their violations of due process, their breach of confidentiality, and general heavy-handedness. So here's his original Facebook post. It says he deleted several comments. Now, Francis J. Beckwith, for those who are not familiar, Francis J. Beckwith, he was a pretty big-time Protestant philosopher who became Catholic. He converted to Catholicism like the early 2000s. And I'm assuming he worked with him. I don't know. But he said, "You are an absolute and total liar. You should be ashamed of yourself for the conduct in which you've engaged in. Anyone would be a fool to ever trust you again. May God have mercy on your soul." So that's pretty crazy. And then they said they haven't been able to confirm Doherty's claims. The second update says it was reported that there was no lawsuit. In a conversation about the investigation this past summer, he asked Doherty, "Do you think you were treated fairly?" He replied, "For the most part, yes. I mean, for the most part, just here's what somebody said and what you have to say, but there have been a few things I've complained about, blah, blah, blah." So then another update says Baylor denies Doherty had filed any lawsuit against the school, according to an article in the Baylor Lariat. And then he received $30,000 before taxes. This was part of his severance package, so on and so forth. Then more updates saying that other faculty members and confirmed that Doherty did what he did. Then other news outlets saying Doherty saying that he was mistreated, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's the background of that. I didn't think Jay would bring it up, but there we have it.
Christopher, you want to go first, and I just want to wait and ask some other questions. But go ahead.
Okay.
Shoot.
So this is why I had
Do it,
in my
bro.
initial presentation a slide on what I'm not saying and what the debate is not about. I think it's like super important to understand here. I don't think either myself or Trent are claiming that there's anything salvific in Islam, and it's important to bear in mind here. It doesn't matter. It does not matter whether Vatican II says
your magisterium matters.
it doesn't matter.
Jay, let's
whether
let him
Vatican
finish his point real quick.
It doesn't matter whether Vatican II says that there maybe is something salvific in Islam. It doesn't matter if all our popes are apostates.
Right,
it doesn't matter whether all our popes are heretics.
Thanks for admitting
All
that.
that matters.
All that matters. Right.
No, all that matters is that Christians and Muslims refer to and succeed in worshiping the one true God.
I don't grant that they succeed in that, and you haven't demonstrated that.
Well, can we just at least agree to talk about that and not whether the Pope is an apostate? I mean, it's just not relevant.
You mean the word apostasy, which you can't say?
I'm not saying apostasy, I'm saying apostate.
All right, not that it matters, but I just noticed things. I want us to look at Trent's shirt here, and then this was Trent's shirt last week. Now, am I bugging out, or is that the same shirt? Now, he might only have one shirt for going on live streams. I don't know. I'm not making fun of him for it. I'm just saying, is that the same shirt? It looks like the same shirt to me. Has nothing to do with his arguments or his demeanor, but that looks remarkably like the same shirt. Or maybe he just has multiple iterations of that one shirt. He might like it that much. I don't know. Let's carry on.
Do you understand? It's a
apostate?
noun. Apostate. You can pronounce it that way as well. Sure.
Okay.
But it's a different noun.
All right.
It's not spelled
It's
the
a
same way.
disqualifier for your magisterium right there. In the Middle Ages,
Father
could you
Ananias, do you have something to say?
in the
I'd like
Middle
to hear
Ages,
from Father
could you
Ananias. I'd
could
like
you
to hear from
worship in a
Father
mosque?
Ananias.
Could you worship in a mosque in the Middle Ages?
So, Trent, Christopher, I know it was a lot. I had to speak really fast.
Big Pokey. So last week I pointed out. Here, let's go to it. Let me see if I can get a good shot. Let's go here. So last week I pointed out some stuff that was driving me a little wild. This ledge here, right? He either needed to put more product in there and really slick that down with the rest of this, or his barber should have left that longer so it laid down by itself. But either way, so you go in, out, down. So it looks like it was a piece of wood that a 6-year-old chopped in half for their blue belt competition, or their whatever they call it in karate. When they got to break the board to get their belt, that's what it looks like. It looks like the broken board there. So this week, it's a little more grown in. It's not quite as bad, but you could still see up here some remnants of that. So I don't know. You might have a calic, though. Those are hard to deal with. Either way.
So I thought it was fast enough to even get through what I thought I timed at 5 minutes, and I didn't. So forgive me.
Let's hear the end. I'd like to hear the end of yours. Yeah, I'm happy to sit and listen to the end of yours.
Well, I want to go back to the kind of further point. I agree with you on the theories of reference and stuff, and use the Superman. That's a great one. Of how we could be seriously mistaken and how reference is established despite these kind of wrong predicates. But that's why I was making the argument that ignores yes, here we go. That ignores the special semantic and logical behavior of the term God. So I'm saying that the rules are different and operates much more, and you're probably familiar with what's called mental objects as opposed to natural. So I concede that. I'm like, yeah, there's situations in which, and all the examples that you've given, I would grant that. But I think it fundamentally ignores the special logical and semantic care of the term God, because it's neither a proper name nor is it a rigid designator, that all the kind of rules, like I said, is like a long conjunct. So when you add not Trinity or not Son, it changes the truth value of the entire conjunct, and it changes the reference. Now, I know that Bertrand Russell had this with his correspondence view, and Strawson's objection is that doesn't work, but they were talking about natural objects, and the way a reference established through natural objects is very different. So that's why I brought that up. I think it's missing the point. And if you want me to go further, I show that, well, if we take the view of natural objects, what you were saying, the way that's established a reference, that we could have radically different attributes attributed to the subject term, but it still refers to the same entity, if I do that with the special semantic logic term of God, we end up running into some contradictions. And that's what I'd love to talk about. So I grant you that, like all your examples, I think it misses the point. And that was,
yeah, I'd like to hear your examples, please. I want to hear more about that.
Okay, so suppose we say, and I identified this along with Gerby, is the fallacy of substitutivity of identicals in terms of epistemic and semantic context. So if I say, and here's some premises: Judaism believes in one and only one God. Christianity believes in one and only one God. Islam believes in one and only one God. Therefore, there is one and only one God, and it's the same God. Now, I'd like to identify, and we could talk about this later, that
that's a non sequitur. That conclusion doesn't necessarily follow from those premises. So they can all believe in one and only one God without believing in the true God. Let's say there is, in reality, a pantheon. Let's say in reality there are many true gods. So the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. You gotta throw some other premises in there to make that conclusion work.
No, there's the quantifier shift fallacy there, but let's look at a counterexample. Ahmed believes there's one and only one solution to a math problem. Shlomo believes that there's one and only one solution of the problem. John believes there is one and only one solution of the problem. There is one and only one solution of the problem. Therefore, Ahmed, Shlomo, John, they all believe in the same solution to the math problem. Now, that wouldn't follow, would it?
No. Nope.
Now,
Nope. Yeah. Nobody thinks
what
that
do you
follows.
think is going wrong there?
I'd love to hear about anybody who thinks that argument works. I don't know anybody.
Well, that's the point. Nobody does agree with the.
Well, then why
Right.
are we talking about it? If
He's
it's not
giving
our
you
argument, it's
examples.
these arguments. What do we
Because
do?
he's gonna say that has to do with it shows. Tell me if I'm wrong, Father. But I think what you're doing is you're showing that a certain argument for reference fails, and the argument would go something like this: you mentioned a quantifier shift fallacy, and one of the most common places to encounter a quantifier shift fallacy is secular textbooks misrepresenting the cosmological argument. And they will say sometimes that the cosmological argument starts with the premise that everything has a cause and shifts to there's something that is the cause of everything, which of course is not the argument, right? Because no self-respecting theist would affirm that everything has a cause. In fact, they would deny it. So likewise, you can't go from everybody believes in one God to there's one God that everybody believes in, and that's what you're saying is a bad argument.
Yes, but
yeah, and
I only bring that, and we all agree with that. We all agree with that.
100%.
So my question is, and I want to lead you into this, well, there's something specifically why that goes wrong, other than just obviously we know is the formal fallacy of the quantifier shift fallacy. Now, what I want to argue though is, do you know he was a medieval kind of logician, Burley? Are you familiar with Burley?
The medieval logician? Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So it was really interesting because he actually brought up something known as the Burleyan condition, or like belief. And so, for example, let me give you another argument that would illustrate this. God is, let's see, Aristotle believes in God. God is a Trinity, therefore Aristotle believes in the Trinity. Now, we all know that that's false. So if we took a kind of Burleyan analysis of this, we'd say, well, what's going wrong here? Well, to get that to actually work, we would have to have this special kind of semantic and logical kind of operator of belief put in there. That's what the second premise is missing, right? That's where it goes wrong. And so that's what I want to point out, is that unlike the natural objects whose reference can be established through kind of natural causal laws and stuff like this, and like you said, context and causation, what I think that your argument's doing when you move over to the question of God is it's missing that Burleyan kind of belief condition. And that actually changes stuff. That moves us into something like the long conjuncts, right? Because God is not, like I said, a proper name, nor is it a rigid designator. The term God is conditioned by the semantic, linguistic, liturgical rules of all of those principles, whether it's in Islam, the Shahada, and these different things, such that if you change any one of those principles, it changes the entire truth value of the long conjunct. And if that's true, it changes the referent. That's my argument. Now, you may not agree with it, but I just want you to see where I was going.
Sorry,
Go
sorry, I just want to clarify there. Okay, at the very end, you mentioned a long conjunct, which I thought was supposed to be a description for God, but you also mentioned changing a truth value. Propositions have truth values, not descriptions. So I got confused there.
We'll put it into like something like the Shahada, right? Like, so when I mean descriptions put into a propositional form, that we can treat it like, I'm not saying it's absolutely identical in every way, but the fact of the matter is I could translate that into propositional form, right? Where you have a long conjunct, where each one of those variables or the propositions has a truth value, correct?
But the conjunct in this case would be the subject term. Is it just really more specific clarification first, Chris? Is the conjunct would be the subject term, right?
Yes, that's right. because it's the
Yeah, just
subject
wanna clarify,
term,
yeah.
because it's not a proper name. It doesn't operate like natural objects, nor is it a rigid designator, cannot be determined. It's referent independent of all those kinds of rules and attributes. That's my argument.
Okay, so I'm not seeing the difference from natural reference because, Superman is not a name, nor is it a rigid designator. Jack the Ripper is not a name, nor is it a rigid designator. And we can go through, dozens of natural objects that are neither, the terms for which are not names, they're not rigid designators. They're subject to all the various linguistic complications that you refer to. So I'm not seeing what's unique about the term God in this context.
Well, because it isn't determined the same way. Just because I can find natural objects that are neither proper names or rigid designators doesn't mean that that is the sole reason why we're having this issue. That's why I said they operate more like mental objects. So what I'm saying is it has the additional problem. What's that?
So what are those other reasons? What makes God unique here as an object of intentional action that sets him apart from every natural example?
Because, natural objects are their reference determined by natural laws of causation. That's the distinction. Otherwise, there's no distinction between natural objects and mental objects. Correct? Clearly there is.
The distinction between natural objects
and versus something in your empirical sense data, right? So a mathematical set, if you have an entire set and you remove one of the numbers of the set, even though there's a whole string that's still the same between the two, removing one number means it's a different set. That's what he's arguing.
Right.
Are you sure? Father, are you saying, because that's just that's essentiality. That's set theoretic essentiality. And that's really no different than essential properties. If you take the property of humanness away from me, then the rest of the conjuncts, in a sense, are irrelevant. But still, Clark Kent and Superman, Lois Lane is attributing a different essential property, taking out an essential property. So it can't be the set thing.
Just to put a finer
you
point
can
on that.
investigate that empirically. Think about, for example, the Hess versus phosphorus or Kripke's H2O is water, right? This kind of a posteriori necessity, given different description. Now, how is it we can make an identity? How can Kripke make this argument? Because they're empirical and they can be investigated. And those things, those identities, are determined by natural causal laws, sure, in essence, but they're empirical and they can be investigated. It's very different than games, mental objects.
Yeah, so I think we can probably break that distinction down. However, my argument starts with, I don't think my argument relies on anything about being reference fixed by natural causal laws. Because on my view, remember, God revealed himself to the Jews and revealed himself to the Christians, and then Muslims' reference to God is parasitical on that. There's no, that reference isn't fixed by any sort of natural law or anything like that. It's just picked up in the normal conversational way from a conversation that was started by Revelation. So I don't think, to me, Revelation is at the very beginning of this referential chain, and the Muslims they just pick it up and take it over. But there's no natural fixation of the name God required for our argument whatsoever.
And just to add to that, even if there was some kind of natural causal, fixation of the name, right? We can fix the reference to God by just speaking about the creator of the things around me, right? That's a causal relationship, God's causal relationship to the things around me. And whether you want to call that natural theology or natural revelation, I think makes no difference here, right? It's a causal connection by which I can refer to the true God.
Yeah, well, you don't need anything about natural theology for that.
On there being a core doctrine.
Nope.
Can you repeat that last? Yeah, repeat that last one.
That's why I said that your view depends on what's a core doctrine. So
I think what Christopher is saying is that you said definite descriptions can refer just in case there's an object that satisfies that description. And so if anybody anywhere on earth says the creator of the world is, and it doesn't even really matter what the predicate is, there is an entity that is the creator of the world. And therefore that definite description captures and that entity. It's that simple.
So if I'm at
okay, well, then that's my example. If it's an identical referent, then I should be able to substitute it. But when I substitute it, I get contradiction. So I'm saying your account.
No. But that's okay.
That's a problem.
No, but this is a well-known phenomenon. So take the Stoic hooded man paradox. Okay, so a guy is in town. He sees a man with a dark cloak, covering his eyes and face, and the guy says, "Ooh, you can't trust that guy. That's no way. You can't trust that guy." Well, it turns out, unbeknownst to the speaker, that guy's his brother, who he considers the most trustworthy guy in the world. Right? So you get this quote unquote contradiction. He is both trustworthy and not trustworthy, but that's precisely what the opacity of an intentional context blocks. There is no contradiction there. So it actually kind of works the opposite of how you're saying here.
Yeah, a contradiction precisely because of the invalidity of the inference that you just pointed out. That's why you don't get a contradiction.
Yeah, it's semantic opacity. It prevents the contradiction.
But that's exactly Gary's point, is the mistake that you're doing is ignoring that these belief things, that is namely that it cannot be determined independently of the rules of the religion, which is what you're assuming. And you're just saying, well, they can represent it, but that's exactly what's in question. So your account doesn't give us a clear example or a clear account of why that actually ends up. You're just saying, well, it's just this opacity or something. But Garby actually explains that the reason why you lead to a contradiction that John both knows and doesn't know his father, i.e. the hooded man, is precisely because of ignoring this belief condition that I'm talking about, that does not operate the same way in all the examples that you've used. And that's what we call the non-substitutivity of identical and epistemic and intentional contexts. That's the argument.
Right. But opacity blocks there from being a contradiction. It doesn't generate it, it blocks it.
So can I just give an example for this, probably more so for the sake of the audience than anybody else? I think it would be helpful to have a concrete example on the table here, right? So we might say something like, Lois Lane believes that Superman can fly. Lois Lane believes that Clark Kent cannot fly, but Superman is Clark Kent, so we can substitute it out, and we get that Lois Lane does believe that Clark Kent can fly by substitution, and now it seems like we have a contradiction. But the point here is that inference of substituting out the identicals within the belief context is invalid, and that's why you don't get that contradiction, right? So
it prevents the contradiction.
You need to tell us.
Sorry, sir.
You need to tell us: are you accusing us of having a contradiction here, or because it seemed like you were a fan of the opacity point, you were pushing the opacity.
No,
point.
I'm saying we all recognize the contradiction. I'm saying that you're not explaining how that works. And so the opacity is not going to. I'm saying the only thing that explains this is exactly what the Berlin condition, right? Of which distinguishes from all the different examples that you were giving of natural objects. That's what I'm saying. It operates much more like mental objects or a game of solitaire versus that. That's my point.
Father, so I think, why do you think that God isn't like a title term, like president?
Because it can mean different things. It can point out different things.
Scripture is used for multiple things. It's used for the divine energies. It's used for the persons. It's used for the essence. It's used for humans. It's used for angels. It's a generic term.
Yeah, it's a generic. It doesn't operate like any of the examples that you've used. So you just keep using
what's a generic term? What's a generic term?
God.
Well, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes I think it's like a title term.
Well, that's what's in question.
And it can function like, certainly in the Old Testament, Elohim is a name. I mean, it's like a name for God. And if the Old Testament, if the Jews and Christians are referring to this being by name,
sorry,
it is this is divine revelation. This is divine revelation. God reveals himself and says his name, and then those guys start talking about him, the guy who just revealed himself, and then somebody else comes in and says, that guy has different properties. Then they've picked up the reference.
So I just don't see. That's my argument, is that natural theology cannot establish a proper name of God like the Islamic Allah or Trinity.
Well, we disagree on that, but that's fine. I don't have to rely on that. I'm talking about
revelation.
The reference of God depends on revelation, and the Muslims just pick it up. They borrow it and take it over from the Jews and Christians. So I don't have no natural theology whatsoever.
The Trinity is the God.
No natural revelation in this project.
The Trinity is the God of the Old Testament. That's why David worshipped Jesus.
Hold on, Enwin, is it really that fast for you? Normally, I would play it at 2 times speed. I'll slow it down to 1.25 for Enwin. I know you haven't slept, but come on, try to keep up.
I think in your last stream you said that David didn't worship Jesus. Is that correct?
Not by that name. Did he? Did David know? Did David ever mention Jesus? Did he mention the name Jesus?
In the book of Zechariah, it's Yeshua that appears. You didn't know that?
And you think he was referring to a first century Palestinian Jew? Huh, Jay? Do you?
You don't think that Jesus is the Son of God?
You didn't realize that? You didn't realize that Jesus lived in first century Palestine?
He doesn't know the Old Testament.
He doesn't even know that Jesus lived in first century Palestine.
Like a demon,
oh my God, dude! Who even
Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. You didn't know that?
Yes, he is. Amen, brother. Amen.
Did Abraham, look at this guy. Acts like a demon. Did Jesus eat with Abraham?
Probably. So what?
Probably. What? You don't know what happened in Genesis? You don't know? Probably.
You don't know? You don't know? Just make your point. Make an argument. This is boring. You're boring. You're boring.
These interact.
Look at this guy.
Make an argument.
The argument is that your natural theology fails. All he has is talking over me. Look at this guy.
I don't have natural theology.
Look at you, man.
Nothing that I have said hinged on any natural theology. You're full of straw men, red herrings. You're a
You said in your last stream that David didn't know Jesus. You said David didn't know Jesus.
Not by that name. Not as a first century Palestinian Jew. And also, so what?
Jesus is a. So you don't believe that you don't believe he's the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament?
What's your point? Make an argument.
You don't believe that Jesus is the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament?
Of course I do. Of course I do.
Okay, so
what?
So Jesus says that Abraham believed in me, right? In John 5?
Yeah, so what? Yeah, so what?
Then it's Jesus and the Trinity in the Old Testament. You were wrong.
Yeah, so, no.
Yeah.
That doesn't follow.
What is it? So it's not the Trinity in the Old Testament. So it's not?
Yeah, okay.
What are you doing?
$1,000. I'll give you $100
Trinity
right
revealed
now
in the
because
Testament, man?
in
It's a simple
escrow,
question. What
if
are you
you
doing?
can make a syllogism, if you can make a
Is the
syllogism,
Trinity revealed
you
in the
got
Old
no
Testament? Stop
arguments.
ignoring the
You've
question.
got no
Stop
arguments.
deflecting. Is the
I
Trinity
said
revealed
it
in the Old
is,
Testament?
yes.
You're sure it
Of
is?
course it is. So what?
Okay, so
what?
when Islam picks up that revelation, it's no longer that God.
Uh-huh.
Why would that follow?
Why not? What are you talking
Because
about,
Islam
dude?
is predicated on
talking
rejecting the triad.
So
So?
what? This is a non
But it's
sequitur.
not the
They
same
can
reference
refer
anymore
to the triune
explicitly.
God without knowing that God is triune, just as Lois Lane can refer to Clark
It's
Kent not knowing he can fly.
explicitly
When
rejecting the
Lois
triune
Lane
God.
says
The
Clark
religion
Kent
is
is a weakling,
erected.
she's
The
referring to a
religion is
person
erected
that she has
on
a
the
day rate
rejection
belief
of
All right,
about.
guys. Hey,
that
let
he
me
is
let
the
me jump in here.
strongest man on
This is
earth.
getting a little bit out of hand. Let's let Trent make his point about Clark Kent Superman real quick, just to let him do that, and then we'll continue.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that you can refer to the triune God without knowing that God is triune. That's just simple. It's just
It's
you
not
could
that.
have a
It's
million examples. You can
rejecting
refer
the
to
triune
people.
God.
You can refer to people in
It's
ways
not.
that
It's a
assume they
false
don't have
analogy,
essential
dude,
properties.
because the
Jay,
Muslims
let's let him
It's
finish his
called
thought, and then we'll have you
dicto.
come in.
It's called the de dicto de re distinction, and you can easily. It happens all the time. You can refer to things that have properties that you not only don't know they have, but you can believe they don't have them. It's easy. People do it all the time.
All right, now let's let Jay come in. And Trent, don't interrupt. Trent, don't interrupt.
So again, he had no idea about Old Testament theology. He doesn't even know if Jesus is revealed in the Old Testament. He denied it the other day in a stream. And then when we come to this basic question, I asked him if the Trinity is in the Old Testament. He doesn't know. Maybe, I guess, who cares? The reason that matters is that he just argued a few minutes ago that Islam picked up this revelation in general from what they heard Christians and others saying. Remember, Muhammad was unlettered. He couldn't read. So he was getting all this orally, right? Islam is predicated not just on natural theology. They do have a natural theology. I've debated Sheikh Azhar Rashid on this point. It's predicated on explicit rejection of Trinity. In fact, in the Quran, there are entire chapters and sections saying you may not believe that Allah is the Father. You may not believe in triad. So the analogies and examples that he gave fail because the religion of Islam is erected on a specific rejection of the Trinity. That's why it matters to go into the Old Testament and talk about natural theology. And the reason that Father Deacon brought up the core beliefs of natural theology is that that's Swinburne and Aquinas and everybody's ideas as to what the essential supposed attributes of God are from natural theology. When Aquinas argues this point, he argues it from natural theology. Vatican II is arguing natural theology. And by the way, you notice they don't want to talk about the magisterial contradictions. That's the argument I came to bring. He's pretending like it's not an argument. I'm going to keep asking them, has your magisterium been consistent on Islam? Can you guys answer that?
So no one interrupt. Let's move now to Chris. So Chris, take as much time as you want. No one interrupt, please.
Okay, so it seemed like Jay's response to Trent there was that the crucial difference between, the Superman example and Muslims' conception of God is that Muslims explicitly reject. They don't just not know. It's not just that they don't know that God is a Trinity, but they explicitly reject that God is a Trinity. Okay, that's still not enough, right? Lois Lane can successfully refer to Clark Kent even when she explicitly rejects the proposition that Clark Kent can fly, which is a true proposition, right? Clark Kent can fly, that's a true proposition. Even when she explicitly
let's let him finish his thought, Jay.
Even when she explicitly rejects that, she can still succeed in referring to Clark Kent and in having other intentional attitudes toward Clark Kent, like loving him, maybe adoring him, worshiping him, whatever the case may be. So it's not enough.
That's why I said it hinges on the question of what worship and adore means in Vatican II. This whole debate came about, I assume, because of the debate that we had on Timcast about worship and adore in the text of Vatican II. And if Vatican II had restricted the language to Muslims have an idea of God or a conception of God, and I mentioned Jake, right? Jake knows about the Trinity. Jake does not worship and adore the Trinity. Do you believe that Jake, the Muslim metaphysician who rejected Catholicism to become a Muslim, does he worship and adore the Trinity?
De re or de dicto?
In any sense, if he explicitly rejects the Trinity.
If he explicitly rejects the Trinity, it would depend on what his description of God. I don't know that. I don't know this man. I don't know under what description he refers to or worships God, so I can't give an answer to that. But if he holds the classical Islamic conception of God, then yes, de re, he worships the Trinity.
Even though he says, I explicitly reject, hate, and oppose your triadic deity, he is a demon. He still worships the Trinity.
The same way that Lois Lane can refer to and love.
Worship and adore is not the same thing as a referent, dude. Worship and adore.
Let me finish. So the same way that Lois Lane can refer to and love is very much like worship and adore, right? Clark Kent, even though she explicitly rejects that Clark Kent can fly.
John Mark, no, I'm just a few minutes
Now,
behind.
you tell me what's
Why
supposed
does
to be the
Jesus say
relevant
that
difference
to
between
the Unitarian Pharisees when he's debating with them? You do not have the love of God, and you
Yeah,
do
I'm
not
like
have the
12 minutes behind, John Mark.
what
What does
of
that
what
mean?
relevance is that? Of what
What
relevance
really?
is that? I'm not answering that question. I'm not answering that question until you tell me what relevance it has.
You won't
You're
answer the
trying
question
to-
because it refutes the very thing that you just told me.
No, because
Look at this guy. Look at this
there's
demon
no
back there.
relevance.
It's a
Because
Unitarian
you won't-
position that's equivalent to Islam. It's the Pharisees who say we have the Father, and Jesus says you do not have the Father, nor do you have the love of God in you. It's in my slides.
You can refer to and worship
my God,
the
it's
true
in his
God
slides,
without.
You said they have the love of God. Jesus says you do not have the love of God explicitly.
No, I didn't say that.
Yes, you
No, I
did.
didn't
You
say
said that. You said that
No,
we can still
no,
love God.
no,
You said
no,
love it. Yes, you
no.
did. Love and adore.
I said he can still love. He can still love God.
And what did
I didn't say
Jesus
have. I didn't say have the love of God. Have the love of God would be a very
Then it doesn't get you
technical
anywhere.
term about the
All of
possession
this
of
is worthless.
sanctifying grace.
It doesn't get you anywhere. That's the point.
In terms
You
of
do not
salvation,
have the
I've
love
never.
of God. You do not have the Father. It's John 8 and John 5.
In terms of salvation,
Right,
I've never claimed that it does.
Right, it's not salvific having the Father in that sense. It has nothing to do with
Vatican
reference or
II is
worship.
wrong to
It's
say
just a
worship
big
and adore.
pile of non sequiturs.
Then Vatican
What the
II is wrong to say worship and adore.
Vatican II, Vatican II.
That's
You know
just
what, I
your
actually
dogma.
I'm going to.
It's your
I'm going
dogma.
to double. I'm going to double my
Can I just
offer.
ask-
Your
I'm
magisterium,
now
you goober.
offering $200 for you to put an argument in a syllogism that can be
You
evaluated.
Let's
laugh
let's
about
turn
your
now.
own
Hey guys,
magisterium. You laugh at your own magisterium.
let's turn to Father Ananias. He hasn't had a chance to speak in a while, so let's give him a chance.
All right, what if I do some magic for you? What is philosophy but sorcery with words? Huh? Okay. Let me address
I
another.
literally thought you were going to do a magic. I thought you were going to do a magic trick, and I was all excited.
This guy's,
Um,
no offense, he's a little
I
fruity.
appreciate actually the argument, Trent, that you made, and I'd like to just get your thoughts. I'll give a little pushback on this, and I talked to Garby about this too, because sometimes when you get a thought, you don't know. I'm like, is this crazy? Or is there something here?
Mhm.
But I did actually find that you kind of had a clever argument about if Muslims and Christians are not referring to the same thing, then there's no disagreement. There is a disagreement, therefore they must be referring to something. And I think Jay kind of hit on this earlier, but there's a way in which that obviously we're saying conceptually, we're having a disagreement about who and what God is. And so what I think would be a helpful distinction, do you remember Tarski's object and meta language, which really was introduced to kind of resolve these kind of seeming paradoxes, like liar paradoxes. The following sentence is true, so it's true, and it's false, and stuff like that. And so I thought this was interesting. Would you agree that we obviously, maybe it's not even the Muslims, maybe I'm talking with a pagan Norse, since we brought that up, since my parents give me a pagan Norse name. We're talking about Odin or something like that, and we're generally having a disagreement. It's like, well, no, he's the highest being, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. I see a parallel with kind of object language. We're talking about we're really having a disagreement about the language and what it refers. That's a very different question at the object language. Is it actually hitting the referent? Wouldn't you think that's a helpful distinction?
It could be. It could be. I'd have to, see how that is developed further, but it's certainly not irrelevant. I mean, it's a relevant and worthy consideration. I just think that there's the sorts of paradoxes of reference that we're talking about with God and the opacity sorts of situations are just enough different than the maybe more hardcore semantic paradoxes that Tarski was interested in. That I wouldn't be sure that it was relevant without sort of seeing it developed into a series of
I'm not saying maps on, but there's something like that going on. That we want to say that, well, in a way, we are having a disagreement, even, and it's possible we're not, at the object language, not actually referring to the same thing, but we are having a conversation at the level of language and religion and what all that's doing. And that was my point, is to see that there was a parallel.
Yeah. I think that's a worthy research project and consideration.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. I hand it over to you.
What about you, Chris?
Oh, so I guess it seems to me like everything, the progress we've made up to this point has led us to a point where I think Jay is insisting, look, there's something really special about the intentional attitudes of adoration and worship that's different from mere reference and different from the intentional attitude of loving. And I would just love either of our opponents here to explain what the relevant difference is supposed to be between those intentional attitudes picked out by the verbs used in Vatican II or elsewhere, and more mundane examples of intentional attitudes like loving, Lois Lane loves Clark Kent.
And she can adore him and worship him too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like it's actually very obvious that even if for some bizarre, idolatrous reason, Lois Lane began to worship and adore Clark Kent, that she would nevertheless succeed in doing so, even though she explicitly rejects important claims about Clark Kent, namely that he can fly, namely that he's a Kryptonian, which is essential to him, by the way, right? So even if you deny things that are essential to somebody, you can still succeed in having these intentional attitudes like worship and adoration toward that object.
Well, the worst.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that.
Jay, can you turn up your mic? Unless you didn't change anything, just
turn it down.
Okay. Keep talking.
Jake, can you shout really loud so I can hear you?
Just start shouting.
Just start screaming.
Oh, he'll get there. He'll get there.
All right. I'm sorry for my jokes.
Can we put this page up?
Yeah, one sec.
So the Pharisees, at this time, I know you guys hate scripture, but the Pharisees at this time had a Unitarian
That's
view.
a punk shot.
Why don't you shut up, man?
People without
Every time I try to
people
talk,
without good ideas take punk shots like
you're
that.
just a fucking clown, man.
That's
you're
a punk
clown,
move.
dude.
Low
He won't
class.
let me make the
Low
argument.
class.
He won't make the argument. Listen to this.
All right,
guy.
let's let Jay make his argument.
When Jesus argues with the Unitarian Pharisees, is this religious devotion that the Pharisees have to the one God who is the God of Abraham, according to them, good enough? Where does it get them? What does it achieve for them? And the reason I brought this up and Vatican II up is because the actions of the papacy and the Vatican II ecumenist project is precisely what is going out into the world and deluding people. And we have two apologists for that whole spiritual illness right now telling you all of this dibber jabber that's supposed to make you think.
This is
not nonsense. It's right here because Jesus tells the Pharisees that when they say we have the God the Father, does Jesus say, you've got the referent correct, you've got the right intentionality? No, he doesn't even say any of that. He says specifically, you say he is our God, though you do not know him. Then he goes on to say that before Abraham was, I am. So their worship, their love, their devotion completely got them absolutely nowhere.
So
and
can I just ask?
I already conceded that you could have an abstract conceptual referent like Jake the Muslim metaphysician, but he does not love our God. He hates our God. And that's why the church fathers and your own popes throughout the Middle Ages said the Muslims are infidels who worship demons and hate our God. You're telling me, well, none of that really matters because I can have an opacity of referent, and so they're still worshiping and loving and adoring the same God as us when they explicitly reject it. And so it's futile and stupid on your part. You're defending the defenseless.
Can I just ask a series of basic yes or no questions of Jay?
Why did you not want to answer? Why did you not want to answer my question about this? You said I will not answer that.
Because it was irrelevant and an attempt
No,
by
it's
you
not.
to lead the debate down the rabbit hole.
Talking about your specific topic is irrelevant?
To the debate, yes.
No, it's not. The worship of God. Does Jesus think that the Pharisees' worship of God got them anywhere? What does he say?
That's not
here?
the debate. That's
it
not
is.
the debate.
The worship of God is,
No,
yes, it is. The
You
Unitarian
better call
conception of God of the Pharisees is no different than the Unitarian conception of the Jews, right? In your position? I mean, of the Muslims.
Your question is about where it got them, and I probably just agree with you on where it gets them. That's not the question.
You said a minute ago that they have love and adoration, right?
I said
Does
a moment
Jesus say that
ago
the Pharisees have love?
Here or no?
Okay. So Jake the Muslim metaphysician, same position, doesn't love our God, right?
I don't know anything about Jake the metaphysician.
Or he's a famous Muslim apologist. He's the one that knows probably the most about the Trinity. He hates our God. He hates Christianity.
Can I just ask you, so you agree with us that Muslims can refer to the same God as Christians? Is that correct? You agree with that?
Correct. That's why I said from the very beginning in my opening statement that love, or adoration and worship are the issues.
Okay, right.
If Vatican II restricted the language to they know about God or they have a conception of God, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
That's why I brought up the Tarski thing, is just to kind of make, how that talk is possible.
So Jay, you disagree with us, right? You think that Muslims cannot worship. They do not worship the same God as Christians, correct?
If by worship we mean something that God accepts or that actually gets you to the object, no.
Okay, right. So if you're talking about what God accepts, then I just agree with you. I don't think that the worship of Muslims is acceptable to God.
Yeah,
I agree.
Agreed.
But
Agreed,
the debate
agreed.
is about,
So-
that's why I said it's about the text of Vatican II, and that Vatican II
No, it's not.
contradicts.
No, it's not.
That's
No,
what I
it's
came
not.
to debate.
Did you get a different
No, it's not.
invitation than I
That's-
got? I didn't. Christopher, did you get that
Cameron,
invitation? I didn't get that
Excuse me,
invitation.
Cameron,
Yeah.
I sent messages to Cameron saying I wanted to debate the dogmatic contradictions. That's what I said to Cameron. That's what I came here to do. And I said, Father Deacon,
What's the
debate
qu-
the semantic
What's the
reference.
question that opened? I think there was like a big banner over us at the beginning that
The
said,
resolution.
"Do
The
Christians and
resolution
Yeah.
is do
I came
Christians
to
and
say that
Muslims
Vatican
worship-
II's use of worship. Yeah, exactly. That's the problem.
Oh,
Vatican II's use
can
of
I
the term worship.
Can we just clarify? The resolution is whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God. The question is not whether Muslims' worship of God is acceptable to him.
That's what
It's
I
not
came to
whether-
debate. Well, that's the word worship is ambiguous. Because this
Oh,
came
so
about from
is
Timcast
there a-
debate.
So you do accept that in a weaker sense, Jews and Christians
I'm
and
talking about
and
Vatican II's
Muslims
document.
do. Oh,
I
look who
told-
won't answer the
listen.
question now. Look who won't answer the question now.
Mm.
Oh, he thinks
I told-
he thinks
shut up,
Muslims
dude.
and
I
Christians
told-
worship
I
the
told
same
Cameron
God.
what I
He
came to
absolutely
Like
does.
that.
I told Cameron
This is
what
awesome.
I came to debate,
This
which
is
is
this
Vatican
is
II.
better than I ever could have believed
So-
this would be. This
So
is
sorry to jump
awesome.
in. Sorry to jump in here. So Jay, do you mind if I read some of our back and forth just to clarify for the audience and for everyone here? Do you
Can I
mind if
give
I read
a-
some of our
Yeah.
messages?
Can I get an ad
Can
real
we-
quick?
can we all
Hi,
just- can we
I'm
all
Father
just
Deacon
look
Ananias,
through
and I drink Spindrift. It is logically determined it's referent to be real squeezed fruit. You see that?
That's
Yeah,
hard to believe.
Natural
I
law.
told in DMs that I'm coming to debate the Vatican II documents because that's what came up on Timcast.
Do you mind if I
And
read?
What is
older men-
Timcast?
Do you mind if I
I've
read
never
our
heard
messages?
of Timcast.
Sure.
Whatever.
You
Okay.
got my permission.
I said I think we shoot for 2v2 on the same God topic. That's my opinion. Should make the whole conversation very interesting. And then you said in bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool, and I thumbs up it. So
Thank you.
maybe there was just ambiguity there. But that's so. I did
how
say
is
though
that-
that
I
let's
mean,
shoot
how
for a
is that
2v2 on the same God topic. And you
I
thumbs
said
up
that
that.
I was going to come to debate that, and I said you can even ask the other guys if that's cool.
You said and bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool. I didn't think
Right.
that that's like the debate topic that you were wanting to discuss.
I said I'm going to debate that. What do you mean?
You said no. You said and bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool, and I said yeah.
Obviously, it's saying that's what I'm going to talk about. That's what I brought
Okay.
to the debate.
Well,
But the-
like I said, maybe that's why there was a miscommunication.
Look at this soy face.
So
over here.
it's fine to bring it up. It's fine to bring up previous dogmatic teaching if it goes to the question of whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God. But it doesn't sound like you want to talk about that question. It sounds like you want to talk about the question
Right.
Do the,
of
yeah,
whether
do the medieval
Right.
whether Muslim
magisterial
worship
statement.
is acceptable to God.
Do the
And that's just
medieval
not the question.
magisterial statement. That's why I said the wording of Vatican II is ambiguous. Do the medieval popes speak the way Vatican II does?
What does it matter?
What does it
What is
matter? Okay. I'm done. So because I'm arguing the magisterial statements, they will not answer whether or not the magisterial statements are
Hey.
consistent. And he won't answer.
Do you guys
do you guys
want
matter.
to discuss that?
Can I just one more
No,
thing?
I'm told I
You
have
can just-
zero interest.
Exactly. They have
even-
zero interest in the thing that I brought to the debate because they can't answer it. They only want to talk about sense and referent, which is fine. That's why FDA is here. He's here to argue that.
Hold on,
side.
you're-
I'm here to argue the
Wait,
magisterial. If you're not going to address my side and my arguments, then there's no point.
Wait, so you're surprised that people do not want to debate something that they never agreed to debate? That surprises you?
Are you here to defend your papacy?
That's
or not?
weird.
Can you, why can't you just
That's
defend
weird.
the papacy?
No. Okay, no, I am not here to defend the papacy. Look at the resolution of the debate, dude.
All right, then there's then the debate. There's no point in the debate because I told him I want to talk about
Okay.
magisterial.
That's fine.
Previously.
So,
Unbelievable.
Father, very
Maybe-
good. That's a good. This is a good outcome. Father Ananias, can we talk about the disagreement argument a little bit more?
Yeah.
Yeah, how about that? Y'all can talk about that because I brought
So,
this. They don't want to deal with it, so I'm done.
So I think that so there's a sense in which I was trying to anticipate like what a good response to that might be, and I kind of thought maybe you might say something like, no, actually we don't disagree because the word God in their mouths is a non-referring term. Is that something you're at all tempted to as a semantic theory, that the word Allah is a non-referring term, kind of like the present King of France?
I'm real tempted. I don't think exactly the same way because of that, the distinction between talk, right, at the kind of meta language level. So and that doesn't quite fit. I mean, there might be some similarity that at the object level, does it just refer back to their own ideas? It kind of self-referential. Maybe, yeah, I might go, but that's why I thought that distinction would be really helpful. And I don't mind even writing a paper perhaps on working that out. But at least I'm happy that both of you thought like, well, that's at least that's possible, right? That we could be both talking and not talking about if we make the right sort of kind of distinction about that. So no, I don't think it fits exactly into something like the present King of France is bald.
Well, because I am interested in semantic theories, because I do think that it's a good research, even though I'm probably not going to like change my mind, but I do think there's a difference between what I'm tempted to believe and what I think is a reasonable research program. Have you read Thomas Brogardis's stuff on Evans's reference drift?
What does that say right there? What does that say to Cameron, by the way?
Good God! Can we mute this clown?
Is Dr. Trent okay with discussing dogmatic teaching? That's what the text says. Yeah, he wants me to be muted because I asked Cameron this question.
What state are you in, Jay? Jay, what state are you in?
I'm not doxing myself to your idiot ass. Shut up.
Well, I can't find you by knowing what state you're in. I want to know how far it would be.
You don't need to know anything about me. You don't need to know anything about me.
Would you be willing to travel to Texas?
Jay, I said that we did.
Would you be willing to travel to Texas?
I'm not meeting you.
Would you be willing to travel to Texas if I paid for it?
I'm not going anywhere near your ass. Are you serious?
Do you have any boxing experience or
so you want to fight?
Let's not. Hey, let's not do that. Let's try to stick to arguments. Let's try to stick to the debate.
He doesn't. So I asked specific. Look in the DMs. The DMs. I asked specifically that Dr. Trent talk about magisterial statements. Cameron, you saw that I put up, and now he doesn't want to talk about it, and now he wants to fight. This is ridiculous. This is what Roman Catholics. No, you guys are the real clowns, man.
Can I just try to clarify a little bit more here? So I'd be happy, Jay, to talk with you about previous Catholic dogmatic teachings. Does
everybody see that I asked Cameron that? You guys see that?
Insofar, I'm not getting into what you discussed with Cameron. I couldn't care less.
Did I? No, it matters because you're saying I lied about it.
I'm not saying you lied about it.
No, the other guy.
So I'd be happy to discuss previous dogmatic Catholic teaching with you insofar as it leads to an argument concerning whether or not Muslims worship the same God as Christians, not whether the Pope is an apostate, not whether.
Yes, you did.
Vatican
yes, you did.
Okay, so I ahead of time said specifically, I want to talk about magisterial statements in the Middle Ages. And is that okay with Dr. Trent? I told Cameron to ask Dr. Trent that. So I brought that.
Yeah, no, I actually have a better one. I have a better one. You said explicitly, and bringing up previous dogmatic teaching is cool, and I thumbs up it. But the debate topic was what's on the screen here: do Christians and Muslims worship the same God?
I said that's what I'm bringing to the debate, and I said to ask.
Okay,
so he doesn't want to talk about it. So he's surrendered the debate. He doesn't want to talk about it, and he said that's okay.
Well, let's let Christopher finish his point.
And then he wants to fight.
The problem with your documents, Jay, is that you want to use the documents to argue not that Muslims do not worship the same God as Christians, but to argue that the Pope is an apostate, that Vatican II is heretical, whatever, all of which is irrelevant.
That's not what I argued. I said in the Middle Ages, the papacy did not consider Islam to worship the same God. That was the argument.
Okay, we can go back to that document. And
here I am.
Have you read the piece by Thomas Brogardis that I mentioned?
No,
I forget what it's called. Like Brogardis, BRO. Yeah, Thomas.
It's not bro. Actually. It's not Brogardis. It's Bogardus.
Is it really? Oh my God!
Yes.
How do you not know this?
No, I won't read. I want Brogardis.
By a guy named Brogardis.
I would love his name to be Brogardis, but it's not.
I know. Maybe it's just because I always called him that. Anyway, it's Tomas Bogardis, and it's man. I can send you the reference. I've actually got it in a.
Oh, wait a minute!
Screenshot over here.
Wait a minute. I think I know what you're talking about.
He's been on the show before.
Isn't he but doesn't he actually say, and he's a Roman Catholic, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad you brought this up because his paper, and I can't remember the paper, maybe this is it. So he's actually arguing that Muslims and Christians don't worship. So it's interesting that you brought that up.
Not exactly. He's providing a semantic strategy to arrive at that conclusion. He's basically just saying, if you would have to rule that out to be certain that they do. He's providing a semantic strategy. So I was just sort of thinking, you've got a good research project. It's irrelevant. You're not coming out of nowhere. You're not filled with hysteria. You're just like, hey, I've got a semantic theory about the word God. And I just want to make sure that you were aware of all the references that might be relevant to that research project. And especially in this case, because he is Catholic, super fair guy. And so he says that, he's not asserting it. He's just saying, hey, here's a way that there could be failure. Because the interesting thing about his argument is that if you could establish the existence of semantic drift, you could grant my point about the origin of the term and the reference and just say that chain was broken somewhere along the way. So if I was going to try to argue your side of things, I would try to develop.
Well, I'd like to combine that,
Tomas's.
and I'd like to give also a recommendation to of another Roman Catholic scholar, philosopher of religion is Garby, and which is just the name George, right? George Garby.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
In University of Budapest, and so I think again he does make the argument. And obviously, it's quite detailed. I tried to present it in the condensed form of what's very unique about how the term God actually operates, as opposed to, like I said, I grant you the things about Superman and Clark Kent and these various things. And I think he makes the best argument that, in fact, actually changing, let alone actually denying in this, given basically how unlike natural objects that are identity to laws of nature governing them, generation, movements. These terms specifically, now the laws of nature obviously are mind independent. Garby argues that things like Roman law or the term God or something like this is completely dependent upon the rules, right? Such that if you did switch, let alone negate. And I think that's a strong argument. So this actually provides a very robust philosophical argument that grants your position, but it says, in this case, it actually changes the reference. And that's the best argument that I've heard. I think that's the most robust, and maybe they can even converge between Tomas's and Garby's as well. And they're both, like I said, they're both Roman Catholics.
Real quick, Chris, your microphone, something's going on with your microphone. So can you just mute yourself when you're not talking?
Yeah, he's got a
So, Father Nice,
lawnmower
can you
going
send
on in the
me
background.
either directly or via Cameron that reference? I'm unfamiliar with that author, and I'd love to, just add it to my, read it and see what he has to say.
I find it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So you were a student of Swinburne, is that correct?
Correct.
So is Garby. And you have two opposing views. So yes. And I have a more detailed paper. And I would definitely say Swinburne has your position. Now, of course, maybe you have different nuances in different areas. But I think, again, there's a kind of essential component as far as kind of like both of your theories of reference that would be shared by, of which my critique is of that position. And I did present this, my critique, my paper of Swinburne on this specific issue to him when I was in Greece. Now, of course, he says, it's a very good paper, but it's wrong, which is exactly, I didn't expect him to say, like, you got it, I changed my position. But again, at the very least, there's some mutual respect here that I appreciate both of you saying that, like, look, I see where you're going with this. It's a robust argument. There's a possibility with that.
Yeah.
I didn't come in here thinking that, I'm going to provide my arguments and convert you guys on the spot to be like, my God, are you serious? That's very hard, especially for us philosophers. So I get it. We want the kind of details and it's hard, but anyways, I'd recommend that. I'd send that to you. And I think you'll find it interest because he was a student of Swinburne too. So like yourself.
Yeah, cool. Now, Richard's more of a Humean than I am. I will say that. And I think it kind of has to do with, even though he was, I've got an interview with him on the YouTubes somewhere. And I asked him a lot about his early education, since he was like, educated under the ancient regime of logical positivism. And even though he escaped from that, I do think he's tinged with a little extra humanism more than what I would be, just because I grew up in a more, open area. And so I think that it'd be interesting to see, like, how many shades of gray there are there on these things. So forget about Richard's natural theology. His theology proper, like in the book The Christian God, I don't know if you've read his book The Christian God. He develops an account of the divine attributes that he thinks are more. I think he thinks that the traditional Roman Catholic versions of some of.
So here's something interesting to consider. And again, I mentioned this at the outset, but Nugloff just said Swinburne is Orthodox, correct? Last time I checked, yes, he was Orthodox. Swinburne is a social Trinitarian, though, who whose views tend towards tritheism, right? Now, Jay, I don't know if Father Deacon Ananias affirms this, but Jay's monarchical Trinitarianism is not the same as Swinburne's social model. So would he say that Swinburne is therefore worshiping a different God? Now, Swinburne doesn't reject the Trinity like a Muslim does, but there's definitely different descriptions in how he understands the Trinity from how Dyer understands the Trinity. So, I mean, is it just bare reference to the Trinity that's necessary for us to say we're all worshiping the same God? Or is there something even more stripped down than that we could say we're at least referring to the same God, not worshiping the same God? Because I do think Muslims actually worship a demon. I don't think they worship the true God, but I think they're still referring to. So something to consider.
These doctrines about God, like simplicity, they're not. I think he actually thinks they're not coherent, and so he tries to provide a coherent example of them. And I think it's a really interesting research project, even though I don't think the Roman Catholic versions of simplicity and other doctrines and God's eternity are incoherent. But I do think Swinburne's a great study in how far you can push that sort of thing and give more human interpretations. And then you've got people like, Christopher, he's like a Shiite Catholic. And so, and so he probably thinks my view of divine simplicity is heretical, but I bet if he did, he'd think I was still referring to the same God. And so, but I don't, so I mean, there's a lot of, and actually that's interesting. Let me ask this, since this came up, Father, would you think that, would you think that Orthodox theologians who disagree with you, let's say about this, are they referring to the same? So suppose this, because I
Now
guess
that's actually a non-referring term. That's a non-referring that disagrees with me. It doesn't refer to anything really. No,
is Kallistos Ware still alive?
No, he passed away, and he was the one that brought Richard Swinburne into Orthodoxy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I read several of his books years and years ago. I'm sorry to hear he's passed. And I know Father Alexander Schmemann, he's passed as well. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
So those are two Orthodox guys that I read everything I could get my hands on with them. And I think they would think that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. But let's say I'm wrong about that. I do think that there are some Orthodox theologians, and maybe even people within the hierarchy, who think that Jews and Christians worship the same God. So here's my question. If an Orthodox did think that, would they be referring to the same God as you are referring to?
When they're referring to the one that they're referring to.
Right, sort of a nested reference. So some Orthodox hierarch or theologian says, I think that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. Now, does that person and you worship the same God?
That's a great question. And so I think, and I think you'll agree with this, the fact that they're baptized within the faith, right? We say, I believe. Now, of course, at some level, I'm sure we could find any individual Christian that has some type of material heresy, right? That there's something they're off about. That's not enough to change the actual referent, right? Because they're still within the kind of codified like language and liturgical rules and all the things that do that. But what I would argue, it's very different when you're outside of that. Specifically, if you're like, I deny that system, like I'm not that. So I would say, yes, they do despite their errors. And that's what my position was, is that those terms, let me give you an example. I believe that the children in liturgy, who, if I asked to explain the Trinity, they'd have a wrong, obviously, view, if anything at all. I would say, of course, they're worshiping the Trinity. And this is Jay's point too, is that it's not simply just an intellectual issue, but there's a spiritual issue of being grafted, right, mystically into a body in which the Lord God lords over, right, that is revealing himself to. And again, we're not Donatists. We're not believing that, like, well, what if the priest says something wrong or believes something? What if the priest is a heretic? Does it invalidate the sacraments? No, because there's a grace through the divine revelation and divine energies that protect. And that is incarnated in all the kind of language, the icons and all the things that kind of protects, right, that the individual is still referring to and worshiping the same God. Now, at the very least, I mean, I would take the position you're not once you're out, but at the very least, I think you'd agree that If you're out, we can't really know, right? Would you at least say that? If you're purposely negating the faith, right, of the Trinity, if you're outside of the church, and like Jay said, hating, are you saying we know that they're referring to the same God or worshiping? Because that's a really bold claim. It seems to me, even if I granted your arguments, it'd be like, it's possible. The only thing that I heard is somewhat substantial was the fact that they had interactions with Christians and Jews was enough, but that's too general, right? I mean, we all agree that it's context that determines the referent, but isn't it the details that matter? I mean, how do we know that it's the correct context? It pushes the question back.
Well, but, I mean, that's a fair point, but he's clearly interacting with that body of doctrine, and it's like if I walk into a room and everybody's talking about Christopher, and I say, and I don't even know Christopher's in the room, but I've met him before. He's changed his haircut or whatever. I could believe that Christopher was out of the country because I saw a Facebook post, but then I didn't realize that it was from, a month ago or whatever. So I walk into the room. I believe Christopher's in another country. He's changed his hair. I don't recognize him. And people start talking about Christopher. When I start talking about Christopher, it's that Christopher. I think this kind of goes into what Christopher said earlier. It's incredibly easy to pick up reference. In fact, it's really hard to not pick up reference. And the literature is full of examples of how trivially easy it can be to pick up reference, and especially through descriptions.
Father Ananas, I'd like to give Christopher a chance to come in.
Yeah, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Or
Jay.
Cameron,
I got a hard out at 10:30, so I just want to let you know.
Okay, gotcha.
It's only 8:30.
10:30 Eastern.
I mean, in 5 minutes, I got a thing with my wife, so we gotta go.
Okay, gotcha.
In light of that, should I let Jay say something, or because, by the way, don't let me forget. I want to follow up on that. So just don't let me forget that, because that's a good.
No, I'm good. I don't have anything else to say. I'm good.
But I want to hear what Christopher has to say.
And then we can wrap up. And Christopher, you're still muted.
He doesn't have anything. He's muted.
Sorry. There we go. Okay. So, Father Ananias, I actually had taken a look at the Garraby paper, Theistic Fallacies. That's the one to which you're referring, correct?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I saw him make a lot of the same points you've made tonight about referential opacity and about rigid designation and the difference between descriptions and names, so forth and so on. What I guess I'm still missing, though, is what the key difference is supposed to be between the natural examples that we've raised and the God case, because, as I pointed out, we have examples where, we get reference even though the term is not a rigid designator, where we get reference even though the term is not a name, so on and so forth. So I'm still puzzled about what is supposed to break down in the divine case. When I'm using the term God, what is breaking down where reference suddenly becomes much harder? Or if not reference, because I know Jay is very worried about the difference between reference and the intentional attitude of worship or adoration.
Well, that's why I let you do that. I just focus on what you guys are talking about.
Real quick, let's get Father Ananias to respond, and then let's just wrap up. Let's go ahead and wrap the show up.
So if you look, would you agree that games like solitaire, Roman law, or something like that is significantly different than the things that we were just talking about with natural objects? Because we have to see there's an essential difference there. If we don't, then obviously that's what the problem is.
So I think there's a very significant difference there in terms of, you're referring to, human mental constructs, right? Games and systems of laws are not, natural objects. They are constructions of the human mind, or maybe in some cases the divine mind. But I don't see how that makes referring to them any more difficult, right? So let me give you an example. Let's talk about solitaire, since you brought that up. Suppose my 3-4-year-old niece is talking to me about solitaire. She's seen me playing solitaire, and she really is interested in it, and she's referring to solitaire this, solitaire that, but she's getting like all the rules wrong. She has no idea what cards can go on top of other cards, etc., etc. But if I ask her what is solitaire, and she says to me, well, it's that game you were playing, Uncle Christopher, that's enough. She's referring to solitaire, even though she's dramatically wrong about the rules.
But that's what I'm arguing is not the actual case with Muslims. So I'm not saying that you can't have some sort of disagreement, or get things wrong, which is exactly why I thought that Trent's point was really good. And I said, yes, they still are referring to. So that's sufficient enough to actually determine the referent in a case like that, right? So but the point that Gerby is making, though, is that, again, this isn't going to work for Islam, right? Because
Why?
you have to see, because the essential, it is still determined, right? The rules again by the rules, right? So the fact that if they're actually pointing at Jesus, right, and we're having a conversation about is he the second person of the Trinity? That would be the analogy that would follow. But we're not. We're doing it within the total system of all the rules and the conjunction, specifically them denying it. So I don't think that analogy, where if Christ was here, right, and you had this, and they were having a conversation specifically like that, which you were talking about the solitary, I'd say, yeah, like they're talking about the same thing, they're just wrong about that. But that doesn't.
Just to clarify, just to clarify my analogy, in my analogy where I'm having this conversation with my niece, I'm not currently playing solitaire. The game is not present. She is not, as we say in philosophy of language, fixing her reference by ostension. She is using words. She's saying it's the game I saw you playing earlier, Uncle Christopher, etc., etc.
I saw you playing the game. That's my point.
Well, okay, so the issue here is just some kind of causal connection, right?
Well, there's an empirical connection there, like it was present before her, so that it fixed the referent. Muslims,
okay, so why
that's not the case with Muslims.
Why can't Muslims fix the reference of their worship by saying, well, I worship the omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator of all the world, ex nihilo, and if you want to like talk about fixing it in terms of causal connection, you say the being who created all this around me, and
okay, so where in the analogy is the empirical entity that they encountered? Because that was what worked in your. I saw you empirically playing the game, right? So that's what I would ask. Yeah. In what instance?
I mean, what Christians have had empirical encounters with God? Like almost no man has seen God, right? So. And lived. Let's set the maybe example of St. Paul aside, right? I mean, none of us.
Well, you believe the Eucharist, right?
That's
so.
Not
if they came in and I saw you partaking of the Eucharist, and of course it's God. You believe that's God.
It's not an empirical encounter with God. I do not see. Yeah. I mean, I what I see.
Well, I'm not saying you see his essence, but like he's really there, empirically.
What I see, yes, that's true. He's really there. That's absolutely correct. Substantially there, really there. But I do not see him. I do not taste him. I do not have any kind of empirical sense encounter with God in the Eucharist.
Well, there we disagree with. And that's going to get into the essence energies distinction. And we don't have to get into that now.
Well, so I'm curious about this. So you do think that that what you taste when you consume the host is God?
No, I don't. No, I would use the analogy. I said you're experiencing God empirically, right? So it's not that he's just present there, and I have a direct, immediate contact, right? The same way, and you would agree with this with iconography, right? Why is it when we venerate icons, we're not engaged in worship? We could say that. I mean, I don't know what you would say on this. I know what Orthodox would say is that God is really in the ink and the wood and stuff without being the wood and stuff. So when I'm touching and tasting, I'm having a direct, immediate experience through the empirical, although it seems wrong to say, am I actually seeing God? Well, think about this. The incarnation is a perfect example. What are you seeing when you see, if we were on the road to Emmaus or Damascus, as he pointed out, are we seeing God? Because you use the sensible, well, yes. You're not, the essences of God is actually present there, correct? You couldn't say, well, no, you're not, or something like that. And so
I'm not clear on what you mean by empirical then, because if you talk about having an empirical experience of God, I take that to mean you're having some kind of sense data of God. You're seeing him, hearing him, touching him, tasting him. And I'm happy to agree that the apostles had experiences like that of God in the person of Christ. Obviously, the situation for us is much different. And so
yeah, William. So if you were subscribed and clicked on the notification bell, you would have known that. So that's your fault, buddy.
I've never seen or heard or touched or tasted God. I've touched and seen and tasted the Eucharistic accidents, which appear
we don't-
where God is substantially present, but I don't know what you mean by empirical.
Well, we're not going to agree with, obviously, the Thomistic kind of definitions of substance accident is the present in. All I'm saying is, and you don't have to know exactly, other than, is he actually there empirically?
Are you telling me I have to have an Eastern Orthodox theology of the Eucharist
I
to
don't
worship
think
the
so,
same
Sam.
God as you?
You might. You might, yeah.
Really?
Well,
Really?
yeah. Like I
Okay.
said,
See that?
I
See,
take
that's what I was worried
very-
about. That's what I was worried about in my prior line of questioning was
Well, I'm
trying
not
to
for this
determine
debate.
like
Well,
where these
that's
lines
more,
go.
yeah, that's a more what Gary said, a more fuzzy area. That's why I said, well, let's just go with suppose we weren't talking about Islam. Let's go to clearer examples of like Odin or something like that. Are they referring to? So again, I just said might. It's a bit fuzzy on that. But again, I know that that's the analogy there, that God is really there. Now, how to say, well, exactly what way and how and stuff like that. All that was needed for the analogy is, for the game is the child, there was something there, right? It wasn't simply just a mental construct of rules. That's all that's necessary to make. So it's kind of a red herring to go into the detail, what exactly how and stuff like that. That's all that's necessary to draw the kind of the analogies between the two. Now, can we get into areas where I'm like, I don't know, really, like maybe? Of course you're going to admit that. We get in any areas where it's like, I don't actually know where the delineation of where it's like you're no longer, right, the exact delineation. Yeah. But all of you can certainly make an acknowledgement. Well, that definitely isn't, and this definitely is. That's my point.
Yeah. So
I think Christopher, I think we should start to wrap things up. I think the main thing here is I don't want it to be like a 2v1 situation because Jay left. So I'd like to if we can just sort of wrap things up. And I want to give Father Ananias.
Why this guy can handle himself?
You guys started, and so
Trent, you're supposed to remind me what I was supposed to ask you. Do you remember? I said,
No,
let me forget. I
forgot.
By wrap up here, Cameron, do you just mean you want a closing argument from each of us?
We could actually, that's not a bad idea. Let's go ahead and do that and make it quick. Make it maybe a minute or 2 minutes. Just sort of sum up what your thoughts are on the debate tonight.
Oh,
we would have invited you to.
Don't let me forget. Is it possible, Trent, that you gave examples in which we would agree that you're getting stuff wrong or something like that? What was the one you're in the room and we're talking about Christopher? Is it possible that two people, one could overhear a conversation thinking it's Christopher and it's not? Almost exact similar example, right? That you were given, where somebody's like, "Oh yeah, I know that Christopher. By the way, Christopher's my brother," and he just happens to have all this stuff. Is that possible in that scenario or any scenario?
There might be scenarios where that's possible, which is why I was encouraging you to look at the semantic drift. In the typical case, the typical philosopher language is going to say that even if you think you're talking about a different Christopher, and you walk into a room and they say they're talking about Christopher, and you say of thinking of, in your mind you're thinking of a different Christopher, you might say, yeah, he's a real, whatever. You've just attributed that to that guy because that guy was the one.
Because he's there in the room. Yes, thank you. I would agree with that. Thank you. That's my closing argument. Yeah. Go ahead. Shoot.
Okay.
And I'm happy.
Yeah, Trent, share your thoughts, and then Christopher, and then we'll close out.
So, I sort of end as I began, which is it's not complicated. There's not a bunch. The word God is not like every other word. It's special in some respects, but it's still a word in the English language. And God, though a necessary being, is still an entity such that he can be the subject of predication. I'm not a radical apophatic kind of person. And I think that it's just not that there's nothing here that's very complicated. Muhammad said some things about God that are not true. He denied some of the most absolutely crucial things about God, that he was incarnate, that he's triune, that the second person of the Trinity was incarnate in Christ. So I think it's like if there's a political ad, I'd say, Muhammad, wrong on the Trinity, wrong on the incarnation, bad for Texas. I'd have like that's what I'd say. And that on the one hand, it's very simple. We're talking about the same God. And as Christopher said, once you latch on to the same being by a chain of reference, there's nothing that stops you from reaching that God with an attitude of worship. Once you latch on to the reference, you're already there. There's nothing that would block that move from I am referring to this being to there's no attitude, no intentional attitude, period.
All right.
That you cannot have towards an object as long as you can refer to it. And then the second part is, and so what? There's absolutely zero soteriological consequences to this. Absolutely none. It doesn't mean that Muslims are just as good off as Catholics. It doesn't mean that they're going to heaven. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be burned at the stake. Now, I don't believe any of those things. I'm just saying that logically speaking, none of those things follow from the proposition that we worship the same God. So reference is easy. Of course, we're referring to the same God, and absolutely nothing interesting follows from that at all.
Chris, let's get some closing thoughts from you.
Okay, right. So again, going back to what I said at the beginning, I think reference is very easy. some of the debate that we've seen tonight from, I think, both Jay and Father Ananias was an attempt to point out either ways in which the term God is very different from terms like Superman or Jack the Ripper or H2O, what have you, or attempts to say that intentional attitudes like worship or adoration are very different from mere reference. But at no point did I hear anything that would actually distinguish God and the reference to God or having intentional attitudes of worship or adoration to God from the more pedestrian cases that we've been relying on. Of course, I totally agree that, you know, God is utterly unlike every creature. Between God and every creature, there's more unlikeness than likeness. And so I certainly wouldn't want to say, you know, to be taken to be saying here that, you know, oh, God's just like creatures, right? All I'm saying here is that when it comes to reference and intentional attitudes like worship and adoration, I don't see what the relevant difference is supposed to be between God and hypothetical objects like Superman or real natural objects like Jack the Ripper or H2O that would make reference to and holding intentional attitudes like worship or adoration toward God more difficult than it is in the more pedestrian cases, right? I'd love to hear. I don't think we really drilled down hard enough on that point here. At the end of the day, I just didn't hear anything that was supposed to make that more difficult than in the cases we've presented. So it seems like, you know, the logic of the cases we presented should hold in the divine case as well.
Father Ananias, did you want to make a closing statement, or were you happy with where we left off?
I mean, I like the closing statement, like if I could get you to that position. And again, with Christopher, maybe a little correction. It was presented exactly what the essential difference between it would be. You just disagree. Is that correct? That's actually would make the difference. So the argument was presented, right? The argument was presented, is what I'm saying.
I never heard anything. I never heard anything beyond God is not a name and God is not a rigid designator. But we have cases which don't involve names or rigid designators where reference and intentional attitudes are still easy.
So when I'm saying those make it difficult, it's not impossible. That's why I added. But then there's a special character just beyond that. So those are just difficulties. They're not insurmountable difficulties because we have empirical cases in which that's possible. So that's why I stressed and rejected the analogy is that, no, it's going to be a lot more actually like the games in which you have no, like, there's no Christopher in the room, there's no game. Now, you may disagree with that, but you realize that's the argument, right?
Well, I gave a counterexample using a natural counterexample to that as well, where reference still succeeds even though there's no natural object in the room.
But there was in front of the person is what I'm saying. And that's why I'm saying that analogy doesn't hold.
That's why I was waving my...
You could make the game a purely mental game, right? So like you and I could play a game of chess in our heads, right? I just tell you, you know, king to E8 or whatever, right? And you tell me what your move is and everything. And there's no empirical object whatsoever. And yet we can still have very easy reference to and intentional attitudes towards that game.
And so what in your context would change it then? So what if somebody starts coming in with a whole bunch of rules? Well, the example was, what was it? Solitaire and what was the other game? In the, I don't know, chess, right? I mean, clearly, and that's why it's important. There's nothing to a total T to kind of point at that would fix that, as you'd put it out in your other examples. So the child starts describing chess when you're describing solitaire. Obviously, you're not referring to the same thing. And it's specifically because it's not operating, it's not mind independent that way. It's the whole kind of rules and sets. So you really change the game that you're talking about. Oh, you're talking about chess. No, I'm talking about solitaire.
No, suppose you and I played a game of mental chess right now, right? We just take the next half hour to play a game of mental chess, right? And now let's suppose we come back to it 2 weeks later, right? And you say, or I say to you, you know, Father, do you remember that game of mental chess we played at 3:49 a.m. British time on the 28th of June? And you say, well, sure, I do. I remember how, you know, I checkmated you in 2 moves. And I say, what? No, that's totally not how it happened. I checkmated you after 5 moves.
I agree.
We could have massive disagreements about it, but we're still succeeding and referring.
That's why I think the Tarski distinction is important. And I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna follow up. There's a way that we can talk about it without not actually hitting the thing. It's like, well, now we're talking about something different, even though conceptually we're referring back. And that's what we get when we start talking about mental objects. It's your level of kind of meta language. So I said, like, in a way, yes, in a way, no. And I thought you guys agreed to that.
We're way beyond closing statements, so I'm going to close. I'm going to give a benediction on all of this. Okay. What we've done is which is the best success you can get out of philosophical discussions is we now know what the that's right. We now know what the core issue is. Now it's way too late in the day to solve the game, but at least now we know. I think Christopher and I understand where the tip of the spear of Father Ananias'
Good.
argument is. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
And
I
so
appreciate
that is that's the most that we could ever hope
That's a
to get
win.
out of this kind of debate. That
That's
is a
very
win.
kind of you. I
And so
appreciate
maybe we come back and take that up, develop that. I don't know, but that's still substantive progress, and I think we should
Thank you, guys. Thank you
close it
both.
so that I can go
Thank you.
watch a movie. Thank you,
Thank
Father.
you, Father
Thank
Ananias,
you.
for joining us. This was a
Thank
great
you.
time.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for your
Cameron,
arguments.
hosting
Appreciate
it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in too. And again, thank you, Trent and Christopher, and look forward to talking more with you guys about this.
Yeah, me too.
All right, and I just wanted to thank the audience. We've had a lot of super chats sent in. Unfortunately, couldn't read any of them out. But that's just the nature of these debates. Sometimes we're able to get to them. Sometimes, most of the time, we're just not. But appreciate you guys sending those in.
All right. I got a super chat way earlier. So let me show that. So Let's Talk God said St. Basil on the Holy Spirit, chapter 26. If you remain outside the Spirit, you will not be able even to worship at all. Do the Muslims worship in the Spirit? God bless. No, they don't. No, they don't. But I believe they're still referring to the same God, even though they're saying it wrongly. So to Big Sarge Audio, he said he believes no point was made to substantiate a case for reference sharing in deity ideology when one group or cult has undermined the original. But the point is that the cult or the group is still referring to the original. Like, you have to refer to the original to change up anything about it, right? If they were just making something up out of thin air, well, that doesn't refer. And if they were referring to something else that already has its origin somewhere else, well, then that doesn't refer. So that's kind of the point. Like, for them to undermine the original, they have to refer to the original. And they can get all kinds of things wrong about the original, but they're still referring. So he just gave the example of the chess game. Remember when we played mental chess, you beat me in 2 moves. Well, no, that's not how I remember it. I beat you in 5 moves. So they're still referring to the same game, even though they're saying completely different things about that game, right? So that's kind of the point. But yeah, so Father Deacon Ananias, way to go. Class act. He was awesome. The whole tenor changed when Jay dropped out. Trent, for whatever reason, did not like Jay Dyer at all. You know, and that was obvious from the beginning. Like, from the second Jay started talking, this guy started acting crazy. So shame on him for that. I thought he was disrespectful with the eating. And then he's in the background fixing his lights and messing with stuff like that. And, you know, I thought it was just very childish and unprofessional on his part. Jay was led to believe they'd be debating something else. So, you know, that's not his fault if that's what he was led to believe. He came there prepared to tackle one aspect. Father Deacon Ananias came prepared to tackle the other. I think once it was just the 3 philosophers talking, you saw how good the conversation started to go, right? And at least at the end there, they said, all right, now we figure out what the problem is and we can move on from here. So that was very good. All in all, though, not a great debate. I don't think. I would have preferred timed, a timed format past the opening statements, less free flowing. I think it would have helped them to get their points off the ground, but it is what it is. It was what it was. Yeah. So that's that. But yeah, appreciate all you guys for tuning in. And yeah, even though we're making fun of Doherty quite a bit in this one, I think he earned whatever jabs he got. But it's all in good fun. All right, so let's see. So you said Jay's a comedian, so he has an easy time with trash talk, but it's really unfortunate when debate turns to this. Yeah, I agree. Exactly. Stacy. Can't say you're wrong if we're not referring to the same thing. 100%. You know, we're talking about 2 different things. So the threats of flashing the money is just so dumb and childish. Yeah, absolutely. That was the R word. You said, but it isn't the same when it's talking about a real game. The other isn't. He's playing a different game. No, but they're still referring to the same game because they say, remember that game of mental chess we played? Yeah, I beat you in 2 moves. No, I beat you in 5 moves, but they're still talking about the same game of chess, right? So remember when Michael Jordan won Rookie of the Year in 1984? Well, no, he didn't win Rookie of the Year in 1984. He won Rookie of the Year in 1983. So I think it was 84. Might have been. I don't know. But either way, I said something wrong. I'm still referring to Michael Jordan, even though what I said was wrong. And the other person says the right year. So we're still referring to the same one. Somebody says something wrong about it. Somebody says something right about it. But the reference is still the same. Cam dropped the ball. Yeah, he could have did a little better. But, you know, I'll tell you from experience, it's not easy being in between people heatedly talking back and forth to one another. I don't know that Jay was looking for gotcha moments. I think he has what he believes are insurmountable contradictory documents from the magisterium that he can leverage against them, and he wasn't able to make use of them because they're like, we're not here to debate that. That's not the resolution. We didn't prepare that. We have no interest in it. So he was kind of rendered ineffective on that front. Stacy, yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm not agreed. Everyday Catholic Gene, and I have not read every document to come from Vatican II, but I've read a bunch of them. Byzantine, God bless you. Good to see you. The Sentinel, my pleasure. Thanks for joining. Yeah, probably. That was a good one. That was a good one. You don't think the contradictions Jay put up challenged anything, rather just forbid the worship of Islam and that it's not valid? Yeah, so again, you know, they came prepared to debate 2 different things. The 2 Catholic philosophers are debating reference. Jay wants to debate worship and, you know, is Islamic worship valid or licit or whatever. And Father Deacon was there kind of just to refute the reference aspect, and then Jay was there to refute the papacy. But unfortunately for Jay, the papacy wasn't really on the table, so it didn't work out. I didn't hear Cameron admit fault on that. If he did, it went past me. I don't know. Big Pokey, my pleasure. Thanks for coming. All right, so we're gonna wrap up. King Silv said if Jay wants to debate the papacy, then why is he running from William? Couldn't tell you. Dark Sun. So yeah, it didn't seem like it. Well, let's say this. If the let me run it back. Let me run it back to the very beginning when he's got the topic up. Okay. So let's go back to this. Okay, so do Christians and Muslims worship the same God? So for Jay's part, he wanted to focus on the worship aspect of it and how the papacy had previously condemned Islamic worship, but now they seem to say that Muslims worship the same God as the Christians. The Catholics were focused on the same God. So Jay was focused on the worship and everything that stood behind that. Christ offers a key. God bless you. Thank you so much for the super chat. My pleasure to host, and you know, forgive me for running behind critiquing their haircuts, but I can't help it. I would say Father Deacon's beard is nice. It could stand a little shape to it, but you know, him for the win. Jay had his little horn going on. And then Doherty's haircut's better now that it's grown in a little bit. The other guy, I'm telling you, looks like he had the Floby. He just took that vacuum cleaner and took care of himself. So you said if you're referring to the same God, then all other one-directional intentional attitudes will also be directed towards that same referent. There is nothing that disproves that. So I think there is licit worship and illicit worship. I think there is true and proper worship, and I think there is false worship. And so the question is, can they falsely worship the true God? And does that even count as worship? Right? So if denying the Son means you don't have the Father, how can the worship you render towards that one be true and proper worship? Even if you have the same referent, right? If it's not the worship that God himself prescribes, then is it true and proper worship? And if there's a heart issue, is it true and proper worship? Because remember, there's a time in Israel's history where they're doing the prescribed worship, but God is rebuking them for the state of their heart. And he says, you know, I'm sick of your offerings. I'm sick of your bulls and your goats and all of that. I don't care that you're observing the new moons and the Sabbath. Until you repent and get it right, I don't want any of it. So, and they had the proper referent, but their style of worship was wrong. So I don't know. You know, it's a lot of stuff to consider with all of this. Wretched Sinner, my pleasure. Thank you for joining. You said worship. Nuglov said worship can be done in the natural sense. I would argue that Muslims can worship the same God, but cannot possess theological virtues such as faith, hope, and charity, since Muslims have faulty revelation. Only Christians can worship in a supernatural way. Amen. Delvin said, does Genesis reference of Adam and Cain offering sacrifice here counts how they worship and how God did not accept? Yeah, that could be a good example, right? So there was something wrong with what Cain offered. And if you read the text, you know, a lot of people say, okay, well, Abel offered an animal, Cain brought something from the ground. Therefore, God accepted the animal, not the offering from the ground. But the Hebrew is, they both brought a mincha, right? So there's really no distinction in the offering that they brought, but had to be something about the disposition of their heart that made Abel's sacrifice acceptable and Cain's unacceptable. So yeah, that could be an example of what we're talking about. So you said, if Muslims think it is sufficient to stick to one while being confused about the Trinity, do you just wait? Or no, I don't think, well, I don't know what follows the or, but I don't think you just wait. I think you evangelize them, right? You show them the same way Paul did at the Areopagus. He's like, you got this statue to the unknown God. Let me make this God known to you. So you think you're worshiping the one true God, but you have a deficient view of him. You don't really know who he is. Let me introduce you to him. And the one true God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So let me tell you a little bit about Jesus and how Jesus came into the world in order to redeem it, to restore it, to give you life in that more abundantly. And when he ascended to heaven to complete the sacrifice, he left us with his Spirit so that it could indwell his church and lead it and guide it, so on and so forth. So you give them the full revelation. They're seeing through a glass darkly, as it were. So we don't leave them in their belief. We tell them the truth. He says, so if someone worships God with the ray of light that they have, even though it's not proper worship, does that automatically make that worship invalid? It all depends, I guess, on the level of light that they have, their exposure to the truth, right? So for those that have never heard, and I think this is, Vatican II's stance, and this is what Lumen Gentium is saying, and Nostra Aetate is saying, Lumen Gentium especially, because what's that mean? It means light to the nations, right? So those that don't know, they're going to be judged based on what they do know. and their worship will be received based on what they do know and what they do in response to what they do know. But those who have been told, well, now you're without excuse, right? So rejecting is different from not knowing. But even rejecting, there's still something. So the reason Muslims reject the Trinity is because they think that we're saying something incorrect about their God. They think that we messed their God up because the reference in their mind is still the same. We're still referring to the same God. They just think we added partners to him. He said, God can reject your worship just like someone can reject your love, etc. Does not mean you are not worshiping or not loving anymore. This is true. Let's see. Doesn't matter even if the descriptions are contradictory. Trump is evil versus Trump is good. All that matters is if some common descriptor necessarily refers to the same object. Yes, so that's true. Yeah, perhaps. I mean, again, like for me, I think there's more to worship than me to the eye. I think, worship in its fullest sense, it has to involve the Eucharist, right? So I think devoid of that, you don't have full or proper worship. But that's a whole nother thing. Denzel, yeah, same with the Jews. Acts 14 Iconium event covers pagans and monotheistic aspect, how they came all together, and in the end, after the conflict, to have one communion. I got to go back and read it, but okay. Classy audience, opposing views, a little back and forth, but respectful altogether. No one called me a demon once or told me I was going to hell for being a Roman Catholic, like in the prod channels. Amen. Amen. And, I've been accused of having an echo chamber over here. Now, I can't help that if a lot of the people that come here agree with the stuff that I believe, but there's been plenty of disagreement tonight, and we've kept it civil. Nobody got booted except that one guy that came in shouting in all caps and talking about, I forget what he even said. Said something about the papacy is the whore of Babylon or something like that. Could be. I don't know. I'll leave that to Catholic apologists and canon law experts to interpret. So then are modalists okay if they do not understand what they're saying about the Trinity? So here's the thing about that one. What kind of modalists are we talking about? Are we talking about a David K. Bernard who's very aware of what the Trinity is, and he says it's an innovation and it's Greek philosophy and it's this, and he rejects it? So when you say, are they okay? We're not saying that Muslims or modalists or Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or any member of any cult, Christadelphians, whatever, we're not saying that they have salvation by virtue of the false things that they believe. We're not saying that because they're referring to the same God, albeit wrongly, that they're good and that they're okay. No, we're saying simply that they have in mind the same God that we refer to, right? They just have all kinds of wrong beliefs about that God. So no, they're not okay. The modalist thing is interesting because many Trinitarians, if you press them, are going to sound modalist in their description of the Trinity. And they're not doing it intentionally. They're not trying to be heretics. They probably don't know what modalism is. But if you press them to explain it, they'll sound like a modalist, right? And one of the big charges in the East-West debate is that in the West tends towards modalism just in general, right? And let's say the East tends towards tritheism. So we got to be very careful in what we're saying. But if you're talking a hardcore modalist, was raised in it, knows the Trinity, rejects it, that's a totally different animal than the unknowing oneness person who just knows They came to believe in Jesus, their life changed, and they don't really get too deep in theology, right? They just happen to be in a oneness church. You say when a question is answered and you say that wasn't the question I asked, and if they still don't answer the original question, then they say, come on, keep up. They're usually the same people who actually don't understand the question. Amen. All right, you said, but like when as a Muslim, ignorance of the Trinity when the Trinity gets reduced to mystery, but thank you for the answer. Gotcha. You said blasphemy also implies intention. People can blaspheme God while being invincibly ignorant. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Amen. Listen, St. Paul said he persecuted the church thinking he did God's service, right? He was persecuting Jesus. Jesus appears to him and says, why are you persecuting me? He's like, what are you talking about? Well, when you persecute the church, you're persecuting me. But Paul says he did these things ignorantly and in unbelief, right? He thought he was doing God's service. Now, it's the same God. Paul, before he believed he had the encounter with Jesus, he wasn't thinking Jesus was God, right? And yet, the referent didn't change. Paul's the first guy telling us that Jesus is God once he encountered him. Let's see. You said that point almost sounds universalist, taking it to its logical conclusion. Sure, there could be true ignorance. Yes, but willingly denying Jesus and spreading Antichrist is wicked. I don't know that that's universalist, taking it to its conclusion, right? I think it's just saying there's sins done in ignorance, and then there's sins done knowingly. So you contend that Muslims need evangelization, and any worship that is not supernatural is definitely insufficient for God and therefore non-salvific. Amen. Yeah, the Weeb Gamer. Yeah. That's the thing. Amen. All right, let's see. I'm trying to keep up with you guys. You guys are typing fast. Yes, exactly. Consecrated soul, I agree completely. And that's what I was saying, that I'm not what I'm not earlier today. We got to define these terms. What does it mean to have the same God? Even if we were referring to the same God, do we both have him? So when I say have or think have, like, do I have God? I think covenantal, because a covenant, you could read Scott Hahn on this. Scott Hahn is brilliant. He explains the difference between like an oath, a vow, and a covenant, right? So oaths, an oath invokes God, right? A vow is usually to God, but these are transactions that exchange goods or make promises, right? Whereas a covenant, it exchanges persons and creates kinship bonds, right? It creates familial bonds. So where God now says, I am your God, you are my people, right? I am yours, you are mine. Same thing, husband and wife. You establish a covenant. So I am yours, you are mine, right? The two become one flesh. Now, the web gamer, God bless you, love you, peace. So to say that we have God, right, is to also say that God has us. And this is kind of Paul's thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, when he's talking about, you have this knowledge, but to be known of God is to love, right? So we want to know God, but we want God to know us as well. And that's impossible outside of the bond of love. So you could refer to the same being, but not have him. You don't have covenant with him. So just because Muslims refer to the God of Abraham, it doesn't mean they have the covenant that Abraham had with him. They don't have the covenant that the Christian has with him. And yet they still refer to that one. So I'm with you on that one. So you said that's why as a Catholic, right, as a Catholic say the sacrifice of the Mass is the most perfect form of supernatural worship. We are offering the only thing appropriate for God, namely himself. Amen. 1 Corinthians conversation about the table altar of devils and gods debunks the worship part. Allah indwells no one and can't be taken part in. Okay. I mean, like, I don't know. So if Allah again is the true God wrongly referred to, then yeah, he can indwell and be taken part in because it's God. But God indwells the believer, not the Muslim who believes all the wrong stuff about him and doesn't have covenant relationship with him. Now there are demons, there are demons, but I think that's a bit different. But again, so actually, let me take that back. I think I can agree with that. Here's why. So, again, I would say on the worship aspect, the Muslims are not worshiping the true God because they don't have a valid Eucharist, because they don't have a covenant relationship with him, because they don't know him, they're not known of him, for all of those reasons. And for that reason, they are worshiping something. But what is it that's receiving their worship? I don't believe it's the true God, even based on reference, right? Even if they're referring to the true God, I don't think it's the true God that's receiving whatever they're giving. So I would say that that it is a demon receiving that. So I'll agree with you on that. I'll agree with you. Whatever that demon is, but that demon, let's call it Allah, I think it can indwell and be taken part in. But I don't think they're taking part in the true God, minus the covenant. All right, let's go. Adventist, do you think their Abraham is different though? You don't think they're referring to the same Abraham? So again, just as a matter of reference, right? Their Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael. So I think they're referring to the same Abraham. They just get it wrong. They get the story wrong. They get all kinds of things wrong. They think he tried to sacrifice Ishmael instead of Isaac. So I think the referent of Abraham is the same as well. You said, out of quest for justice, men do horrible things as St. Paul did. Absolutely. Amen. God bless, Nugloff. Have a great night. You said Muslims don't have God. I agree. 100%. Sean, I think the verdict was that they were having two different debates, that the Catholic guys were debating reference and the philosophy of language. Deacon Ananias, Father Deacon Ananias came in and saved the day and made it very civil, respectful, and productive. Trent hated Jay's guts and acted like a child every time Jay opened his mouth. And then Jay came up to debate a different topic altogether because he was misled into debating something else. He was told that it would be different. Yes. Correct. Same God, different poker, same God theology skewed. Yep. All right, so let's see. Trying to catch up. You guys are talking fast. Yeah, it wasn't great, man. It wasn't great. So you said Muhammad is the Muslim. Did Muhammad worship and adore the one true God, the creator, living and subsisting within himself? So again, to the same thing I would say, as the rest of the Muslims. No. But did he believe he was referring to the one true God when he talked about him? Yes. Agreed. Hey, man, I try. Pray for me. Love you too, bro. Let's see. You said it's not what you think it's not. There you go. Jay started to call Trent a demon and brought up Trent's firing for sexual harassment. Yeah, that was a low blow. I didn't think that was going to come up, but I mean, it's out there. By the fruits you shall know them. Jesus went to the desert and defeated the devil. Muhammad went to a cave and embraced him. That's a good parallel. Nice typology. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't you think it's ironic that they were having a debate on reference and they both disagree on the debate, even though they're referring to the same debate? Yeah, I didn't think about that till you just said it, but there is a twinge of irony in that. That's good. I agree. I don't think they worship him with us. I mean, I would disagree with that statement, or at least the adoration. But again, now we have to let the Catholics tell us whether or not adoration and worship is the same thing. There you go. Debate's over. Inwin won it. So I believe Muhammad was in spiritual delusion and wasn't telling lies for personal gain. Oh, I don't know what his motivations were. I definitely think he was in spiritual delusion, but both could be true, right? He could have been both spiritually deluded and telling lies for personal gain. So I don't think it's an either or. You agree for the parts of the debate that you watched, they were having two different debates like NeGod.net did with Joe and Water Baptism debate. Yeah, that debate was horrible because NeGod.net was trying to debate Sola Fide instead. That debate was horrible, especially the part where he says, Joe Heschmeyer goes, there's nobody in the early church that disagreed on baptismal regeneration. And he's like, yeah, well, not every Christian in the early church wrote about baptism. We only have a very few that did. We don't know what all the rest of them believed. Okay, so we're to believe on this hypothetical that all the rest of them agreed with NeGod.net and not with the bishops and the church fathers who were writing about it. But here's the kicker. It's not just the church fathers that we accept that were writing about baptismal regeneration. The heretics also agreed with it. So this was universal across the board from every writing that we do have. So, I mean, you could speculate as to the writings that we don't have or to what people who we don't know what they believed possibly believed, but there's no evidence that anybody disagreed with this. But that was his argument. We don't have all of the, we don't have all of the writings of every Christian, and we don't know what they all believe. Crazy stuff. Rabbi Radar, what's up, brother? God bless you. What's going on, my brother? Hold on, let me do this. Radar Apologetics Media. Let's share this. Boom. So listen, guys, Rabbi Radar, he is in the process of opening up a Messianic synagogue in New York City to do the work of the Lord there. So if you would like to contribute to the cause, I will. Let me see. How do I share this? Let me put the link here. Let's copy that. If you would like to donate to the work that he's doing, you can do so here. So the name of the synagogue is going to be Upper Room NYC. And then he's also going to be at, where's he going to be at? He's going to be at the Messiah Conference 2025 selling merchandise. I wish we would have got a little more in the picture here, but the t-shirts and hoodies look really nice. So yeah, please consider supporting the brother. They have, I believe he said $50,000 to match what they could raise. So they got to raise 135 grand in 35 days to secure their space. And they got a $50,000 matching donor. So whatever you give can be doubled. So please consider supporting the work that he's doing. Praise God. Yeah, and there you go. I forgot he was a mod, so he could post links as well. Who's Protestants? Yeah, Radar would be a Protestant. There you go. Messiah Conference at Messiah University in Grantham, PA. My pleasure, brother. My pleasure. I hope you're well. I know you've been busy. Glad to see you made it home safe. Nathaniel, you probably can't, you know? I think you probably can't. Giovanni Catholic, God bless you. Zealots, God bless you. Sentinel, God bless you. All right, so let me see. I got 94 people watching. How many likes do we have on this video? We got 71. That's decent. That's decent. So let's consider, if we could, gently tapping that like button if you haven't already. I'd appreciate it greatly. Yeah, good to see you too, brother. Smiley, so basically, here's what you missed. Trent Doherty and the other gentleman, what is his name? I'll tell you right now, Christopher Tomaszewski, were two Catholic philosophers arguing that Muslims and Christians reference the same God. They were building their case off the philosophy of language and, you know, the whole concept of reference and sense and all of that kind of stuff. And Jay Dyer and Father Deacon Ananias were debating the worship aspect of it. Jay wanted to show contradictions within papal documents about worshiping, you know, Muslim worship and Christian worship, and how in the medieval Catholic Church they said Muslims did not worship the Christian God, but how Vatican II says that they did. So Jay would be asserting a contradiction in the papacy and in the Catholic Church's beliefs. Father Deacon Ananias was trying to rebut the philosophical arguments from the Catholic folks. And the one Catholic guy, Trent Doherty, did not like Jay at all. So he acted very unprofessionally and immature every time Jay opened his mouth. And then Jay was kind of, they weren't there to debate what Jay wanted to debate. So he was kind of just nullified and left to say not much of anything. So that's what you missed. Aldous, no. Like it again. Devin said religion subject is to be talked more about, as Brian Holdsworth and Tim try. For many don't get religion. It has certain ways of worship that are similar to the eyes, yet God is reference. Flesh that out for me a little bit. I think I know what you're saying, but I'm not positive, so I don't want to misunderstand you. So you say you blame it on their zeal. Like St. Paul said, his zeal was blinding him from seeing the fullness of the truth, that the Jews were worshiping God in ignorance in Romans 10. Yeah, I think that's part of it. My pleasure, my pleasure. Well, I mean, it doesn't follow that nobody could do it after him. So you know, some could do it in ignorance, not knowing what they could have less light than Muhammad had, so to speak. So just because Muhammad couldn't do it doesn't follow that nobody after him could. Now, I'm not saying that Muslims do. In fact, I don't think they do. But, you know, Lumen Gentium's thing about God judging those with limited knowledge based on what they do know, you could throw the Muslims in there and say that these Muslims who don't know, they just do the best with what they got, that they could. All right. Oh, wait, hold on. There you go. I didn't even see this. I didn't see they had a new YouTube channel. So let's subscribe. Boom. All right. Yeah. Let's also give this channel a subscription if we could. Doesn't have any content yet, but I'm sure it will plenty much. Jacob, I don't remember the ones Jay was quoting in the debate. Let me see if we can find them. He had them on his slides. All right, so boom. Let's see. So this is hard to see on the screen. Let me go full screen with that. See if I can make that a little bigger. Take that off full. Okay. So this is from Gesta de Perfrancos. That's one that he had.
Demons and the
Saying that they worship demons. This is from the 12th Ecumenical Council. So the Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, Pope Innocent III said Jews aren't brothers in Abrahamic faith. What else did he have?
Jews, for example.
Lateran IV said the Catholic state must suppress Judaism and Jewish power. So again, it's asserting that Jews don't have the same God as the Christians. Fourth Lateran Council calls for the Fifth Crusade. Abandoning this crusade or duty equals excommunication. So there you go. It says they shall compel them to do this without any backsliding by sentences of excommunication against their persons, of interdict on their lands, excepting only those persons who find themselves faced with an impediment of such a kind that their vow deservedly ought to be commuted or deferred in accordance with the directives of the Apostolic See. So obviously, you know, the Crusades were fighting against Muslims there.
It's not an academic.
Let's see what else. Okay, 15th Ecumenical Council, Pope Clement V. It says the blasphemous public worship of Islam must be forbidden. So he said this brings disrepute on our faith and gives great scandal to the faithful. These practices cannot be tolerated any further without displeasing the divine majesty. Later down, he says they are to remove this offense altogether from their territories. Talking about Islamic worship. Same thing, Council of Vienne under Pope Clement V. Faithless enemies of Christian name, unclean blasphemers. Pope Calixtus III in 1455. What's it say? So to reconquer Constantinople, which in punishment for the sin of man has been taken in ruin by Muhammad II, the son of the devil and the enemy of our crucified Redeemer. Further, I vow to deliver the Christians languishing in slavery, to exalt the true faith, and to extirpate the diabolical sect of the reprobate and faithless Muhammad in the East. For there the light of faith is almost completely extinguished. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand be forgotten, let my tongue cleave to my jaws. If I do not remember thee, if I make not Jerusalem the beginning of my joy, God and his holy gospel, help me. Amen. So this was a solemn vow shortly after his election as Pope. All right. And then the Nostra Aetate 3 and Lumen Gentium. So he's saying all of these previous documents contradict what Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium are saying from Vatican II. So there you go. Well, I think it starts. Christ offers a key with divine revelation, and not even revelation in Scripture, but rather the revelation of God to. I mean, you could say to Abraham, because they claim to be Abrahamic faiths, right? So, the God that revealed Himself to Abraham, the God who would later be identified in the burning bush, seen as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who it starts with. It starts with the God who revealed Himself. And when Muslims refer to God, that's the God they're referring to, right? So they are referring to the true God, even though they have false ideas about the true God. So that's kind of the point. Aldous, if you must smash it, smash away, but I prefer a gentle tap. But it's your keyboard, man. Do what you got to do. Okay, so you said the Catechism states that adoration is the acknowledgement of God as God, Creator and Savior, the Lord and Master of everything that exists, as infinite and merciful love. Okay, great. So that adds some context. So that might not necessarily be worship. Again, I'll leave it to Catholic apologists to explain the distinction. But thank you for that, Dry Bones. Luis said, my favorite part of the debate was when Jay acknowledged that the Muslims do refer to the same as God of Christians, and when Chris acknowledged that the worship of Muslims does not please reach God. So yeah, and that's kind of the funny thing. I don't think either side really disagreed with the other's main points. I think they came to argue different things. I think Father Deacon Ananias disagreed a little bit, but in the end, they were kind of saying pretty much the same thing. But I think where the problem was that the two Catholic philosophers, you know, they weren't there to defend the Catholic Church per se, or the papacy, or papal documents or anything like that. So for Jay, he couldn't wrap his head around that, you know. Delvin said, broader question is here, what makes up a religion, aspects of worship given to God? Yeah, I think a religion is, I think it's more than that even, more than aspects of worship given to God. It's our service to God and neighbor, right? Because pure religion before God, you know, that religion that's undefiled and pure before God our Father, is to do what? Take care of the widow, the poor, the orphan. So I don't think it's limited to just God, but service to God and neighbor, I would say. And then our beliefs about them. All right, so let's see. So I'm not saying. What's funny is some people say that Jesus in the Quran is not the Jesus we Christians know and worship, when we're referring to the Father, all that goes out the window, and the Holy Spirit. Yeah, I mean, I would say the Jesus in the Quran is the same referent. You know, they get the stuff wrong, but still referring to the same Jesus. Let's see. You said syllogism is the debate. Yeah, Trent wanted Jay to. He offered him $1,000, and then he immediately offered a tenth of that. I'll give you $1,000. I'll give you $100 if you could write out one syllogism. I'll make it $200. And he actually flashed cash. That was pretty low class. Jay brought a good argument that different Catholic councils contradict each other. It's sad that Chris Trent did not address this argument because I don't think there is a contradiction. Yeah, I'm just realizing that I've been talking this whole time. My face hasn't been up. Hold on a second. This the one? There we go. Yeah, I don't think that. Well, let me say this. I don't know. But I'm not confident that either of the Catholic philosophers are really that well versed in papal documents or canon law or anything of that sort. They didn't seem to be, at least, and their complete lack of interest in it. Because let's say that's not the debate topic. Like, if that's something you know about, generally you could be kind of coaxed into at least saying something about it. Neither of them said anything about it. So, maybe they weren't the guys for that particular discussion. All right. Let's see. Appreciate it. Not saying any one of us is going towards total indifferentism of religions here. Amen. Yes, absolutely. You said you forgot the word not. It's a typo, by the way. The worships of Muslims does not please or reach God. Got you. The disciple said, and the king shall answer and say to them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me. Amen. Lewis, absolutely. Do the Orthodox believe the Catholics worship a different God? Genuine question. I don't know. It would depend on the Orthodox you ask. It really would. You got some that say that by virtue of the filioque, that it is a different God, but I think they would be an extreme minority. But as an official position, I don't think so. I don't think the Orthodox Church is saying that the Catholics have a different God. Amen. Man-made, to say the least, possibly, probably demon-inspired. All right. Yeah, well, then they're being inconsistent in when. So let's see. Your question is, do God the Father accept Muslims worship who reject the Son and the Holy Spirit? I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, right. I've never been to West Hollywood, but I can only imagine. I have been to San Francisco, though. And I've been in the Castro, unfortunately. And yeah, so somebody made a reference way early in the debate about that. I was laughing. You said, in the same way Joseph Smith created a God to satisfy his carnal desires, so did Muhammad. Muhammad and Smith made up a God, but I guess Muhammad gets away with it. Smith doesn't. No, I would say the same thing. So again, they're still referring to the God revealed, and the God revealed to the patriarchs, to Israel, to the apostles, the God recorded in Scripture. They're still referring to that God. They're just distorting certain things about him. They're saying wrong things about him, right? So I don't think Muhammad gets away with anything more than Joseph Smith does, or Charles Taze Russell, or Ellen G. White, or whoever started the Christadelphians, or whoever else. I think they're all referring to the same thing. They're just perverting it. but that thing has to be the reference in order to be perverted, because if it's something totally different, well, they're not perverting anything, right? They're just coming up with something brand new out of the air, out of thin air. So that's kind of the argument, right? Is different God word based, meaning like semantically, you know, like in terms of reference. What's today, by the way? Today's Friday. All right, good. I got to get up for work early. I'm sitting here thinking it's Saturday and I got nothing to do tomorrow. So yeah, break that down for me, Sam and Pat. Flesh that out when you say is different God word based. I don't want to answer something you're not asking. You said, but that is Jay and Ananias' view. The Catholics and Protestants worship a false God. Would you say that aren't bad representatives of Eastern Orthodoxy? No, I mean, do they say the Catholics and Protestants worship a false God? Do they really say that? That would be kind of wild. Again, I don't think, I could be wrong. You know, I stand to be corrected. Inwin's in here. He knows a lot about what the Oriental Orthodox Church believes. Inwin, does the Oriental Orthodox Church believe that Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestants all worship a different God, a false God? Yeah, I mean, if they say that, that's kind of wild. Yeah, I do. I work on the Sabbath. Sure do, buddy. What's up, Moses? How you doing? By the way, if you guys aren't subscribed to Moses, give that brother a subscription. Hold on. Pull him up here. Where are we at? Let's find his channel. Moses, you ain't a mod? Hold on. How do I make you a moderator? Here we go. All right, Moses, you got a wrench, brother. Put your channel link in the description. Everybody head over there and give Moses a subscription if you're not already subscribed. He's doing some really good short form videos that I enjoy. His editing is top notch. I gotta learn a couple things from him. He's got one 4 and almost 5 minute video today, the Church versus Israel. Haven't watched that one yet. I gotta check that out. But yeah, go check him out. So he's at 463. Let's get him to 500 before tomorrow. Yeah, I'll check this out before I go to bed. All right, let's see. Amen. Jesus is our Sabbath. Christology is anathematized. Jesus is God. We call Pope Leo the Antichrist and Satan's children, the evil Chalcedonians. So different God or same God? We all believe in the Trinity. Brother Warren, what's going on? How are you? You did a watch party too, right? How'd you think it went? Yeah, 100%. Very much so. The eating was obnoxious. The antics, the money, the adjusting the lights, the constantly acting like a doofus every time Jay opened his mouth. Terrible. There you go. Moses is dropping a video Sunday on struggling with porn. Very important topic for men in the church. So definitely looking forward to that one. Yeah. All in all, when Father Deacon started talking with those guys, I thought it went well. I would like to see him do a dialogue with them, maybe without Jay. Because for whatever reason, Jay was like shark bait to Trent. Like the other dude, he kept it pretty cool and composed, but yeah, Trent was definitely obnoxious. So I could go the rest of my life without watching that guy debate again. King, and in the end, here's the funny thing, man. I don't think they even really had a problem with it. I think they ended up granting that by the end of it. Yeah, 100%. 100%. That guy was great. A disciple, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for coming. All right, all right. You got 4 subscribers. Let's get him some more. Come on. Just click the button. It don't cost you nothing. Tim. Yeah, absolutely. But my recommendation would be for those inquiring, just focus on the basics, like stay off YouTube and these kinds of debates. They could get a little idiosyncratic and in depth. Just focus on like reading the Gospels and developing a prayer life. You could worry about all this esoteric stuff another time. Yeah, I agree 100%. 100%. He was great. And I've heard him talk a bunch of times on Jay's channel. Never put a face with the name before. And he just he comes in like if Jay's got to run to the bathroom, he'll start leading the session. But seems like a really learned individual, and just his demeanor. I mean, thank God that he is the way he is because he's a priest, right? If he had got on there acting like some of the other characters were acting, that would be disappointing. Yeah, amen. Because they came way later. Way later, the faith was established, and we have way too much evidence and way too much life of the church to think it went the other way. Especially Mormonism. They came way too late in the game to be taken seriously. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the debate was. It didn't seem like they were debating the same thing. But in terms of the reference thing, I think they had that. I think that Jay and Father Deacon ended up kind of conceding that at the end. Yeah, Trent was a mess, man. Trent was a mess. he showed glimmers of it last week. I didn't really appreciate his attitude or demeanor last week, and then seeing this tonight, I'm like, it's a wrap for that guy. I don't think I'd ever waste time watching him again. Even though he calmed down when talking to Father Deacon, it was just like, I don't know. What happened with Trent Horn? No, not Trent Horn. Trent Doherty. Trent Doherty, the Catholic philosopher that was debating tonight. So let me find him. So this dude, top left corner. This is Trent Doherty. Nah, Trent Horn would never act like this guy. This was crazy. Oscar's muted? How's that possible? Who muted him? Hold on, let me see how I do this. Huh. So, 1 second. I see. All right, hold on. Yeah. So how do I unmute him? Give me a sec. How do you unmute somebody? I can't even find him in the comments anymore. Does anyone know how to unmute somebody? Because I'll unmute them. I just can't find them. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, that's the thing, Moses. I can't even see his name. It's like all his comments must have disappeared once he got muted. Like in StreamYard, I'm all the way back to the beginning of the comments. Let's see. All right, I don't know. I'll have to figure it out. I can't do it right this second. All right, but listen, guys, it's midnight here, my time, and I gotta get to sleep because I gotta work at 8 in the morning. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll mess around with it tonight or tomorrow. But listen, I appreciate all of you. Thank you all for the respectful dialogue. Oscar, if you're still watching, I apologize for you getting timed out. I'm going to try to figure out how to undo it. And yeah, so you said ask Sam. All right, I'll ask him. So yeah. So what we learned tonight is that maybe everybody shouldn't be debating. And maybe if you're going to debate somebody who you're not going to act like a total jerk around. But yeah, so I'm going to get out of here. God bless you all. I will say a quick prayer for one and all. My mic is getting messed up over here. So, Father, we thank you, Lord, for those who tuned in this evening. We thank you, God, that we were able to watch a somewhat at times entertaining debate. I don't know if anybody was swayed by any of the arguments, Lord, but just help us to seek after truth. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear what your Spirit is saying to your people, Lord. Guide us according to your word, according to your Spirit, and bless those who are watching. Bless them with great sleep. Speak to them in dreams and visions, and give them just an ability and a desire to do your will. So, Father, we love you. We glorify you. We praise you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Love you guys. Good night. I'll catch you later.